My family moved to Memphis, Tennessee when I was 5 years old. And I cried all the way there because I wanted to stay with my mama.
It's 1949, and Myra Brown is saying goodbye to her extended family in rural Louisiana.
My daddy got a job as a lineman in Memphis.
Memphis, they say, is this sort of gateway into the Deep South. It really became this meeting point between white and black music, between country and early sort of rockabilly, hillbilly music, and African-American music, gospel and R&B. And the focal point for Memphis music at that time is Sam Phillips and Sun Records.
Myra's dad, J.W., is a bass player, and he's quick to discover that Memphis is an epicenter for a new kind of music, rock and roll.
Sam Phillips brought together many of the musicians from the South to create this new sound. He is the one who discovered Elvis Presley, Carl Perkins, and Johnny Cash. Sun Records, it's the birthplace of rock and roll.
When J.W. suffers a serious electrical accident at work, he gets a large settlement. It's the catalyst for a career change.
My daddy said, I'm going to go to Louisiana and find my cousin Jerry and see if he'll come to Memphis and we'll put together a band. He said, I've heard how great he is on the piano, how talented he is.
Only 21 years old, Jerry Lee Lewis has already been married twice. The first time when he was 16.
In the South, people got married young, that they started having kids really young, and that then they had a lot of them. That's the story of the Lewis family.
Jerry Lee now lives with his second wife, Jane, in Faraday, Louisiana.
Daddy found Jerry working at a little dive called the Wagon Wheel. Daddy went over and introduced himself and said, I would like for you to stay at my house as my guest. I'll take you to Sun Record, introduce you to Sam Phillips, and let's see about getting a contract. The phone rings, and I'm this 12-year-old kid. The man says, can I speak to J.W.? I need to get directions to your house. Jerry came in, and he was wearing a red plaid shirt. He had a haircut that was way too short because his ears stuck out. And he just looked like nothing special. But then he started playing the piano and immediately got my attention. It was like we were all mesmerized because he was just so good on the piano. My opinion changed drastically of him. His haircut didn't matter anymore.
I was 3 years old when he moved into our house. They practiced in the living room for a while, and his hands were so fast, it was just like they were in double motion. It was like he had 4 hands. It was just hard to believe that he could play it like that. And the man was a great musician.
Then Daddy took Jerry to Sun Records and had him audition. And that's how it all began. His first record was End of the Road and Crazy Arms. One day in the studio, my daddy said to him, Jerry, play that Shakin' song. Because when they were traveling and doing shows, Jerry would do that song and the audience would just react like crazy. And that was Whole Lotta Shakin'. The first time Sam heard it, it was like, this is it, you know.
Myra has just turned 13 when her dad and Jerry fly to New York with their band to make their debut on live national television.
Mom and I were at home watching television, and you knew something great was coming out of this. guess seeing him on Steve Allen's show, he rose in my mind, you know, to a higher level.
It is safe to say that the overwhelming majority of the network TV viewing audience would never have seen anything like Jerry Lee Lewis before in their lives.
I'll shake, baby. You can shake one time for me.
And for a young girl growing up in the South, just the notion that you would know somebody who would be on television was almost beyond imagination.
I was 13 years old. He became a little god in my mind and in a lot of people's mind at that time.
And a whole lot of shaking hit. They went up to $10,000 a show. Now this is in the 50s, that's a lot of money.
Clearly, Steve Allen got a kick out of him very soon after he booked him to come back on.
Mr. Commotion himself, Jerry Lee Lewis. There he is.
So to get a second bite at that apple, national television, that was a big deal.
Goodness gracious, great balls of fire.
As Jerry's fame skyrockets, his marriage falls apart.
He knew what time school let out, and he would go up there. He'd say, hey, you want to go get some ice cream? And he always knew I wanted to go get ice cream. Jerry and I, we would go to a movie after dinner or something like that. I thought he was being nice to a kid. I thought it was that kind of thing. You know, like pat the kid on top of the head or something. I was idolizing Jerry and looking up to him and thinking he's this great big star. What I didn't know was that he was falling in love with me.
Myra's parents had no idea that Jerry Lee was wooing their daughter. They knew the two had fun together, they knew they were friends, but it truly didn't occur to them that this older man would try to have a relationship with their child.
You know, after supper or something, we drive up to the A&W or whatever it is. And Jerry would kiss me. At first, I didn't know what to think about that. I mean, it was nice, but I was confused. I was like, I'm 13 years old. So it really messes with your mind. You don't understand what's going on, but you don't want it to stop either because it was you liked it. But that's how our relationship was.
Jerry never asked Myra to get married, per se. He got the marriage license by taking this older friend, I think she was in her 20s as well, to the courthouse and having her sign Myra's name to the license. Nobody questioned it. Apparently they didn't ask for ID back in those days.
And Jerry came back home. He said, come outside, I'm gonna show you something. So he pulled this paper out, and I looked at it, and it said, marriage license. And I looked at it, and I said, you mean we're married? And he said, no. We're not married, we're gonna get married. And I said, what? And he caught me by my arm, and he turned me around, and he said, Myra, I love you. And I want to marry you. And I think I just melted, I think it just, and I told him, and I said, no, I love you too. I said, but I'm still too young. This is crazy.
I think Jerry Lee was a predator. He wanted somebody he could mold into whoever he wanted. Myra was a good, dutiful girl, and so she was an easy mark for him.
December 12th, 1957 marks a crazy new chapter in 13-year-old Myra Brown's life.
We were having supper. Jerry said, Myra, you want to go to a movie? I said, yeah, sure. We got in the car, and Jerry headed toward Mississippi. And I'm going, was there a movie theater out this way? And he said, no, we're going to get married. He had found this pastor or whoever it was that was going to marry us. And I think I was in a coma. I think my eyes were like this. And I got out of the car. I had on the red dress that I wore to school that day. And we walked in this little chapel. I don't remember getting married, but I know it happened. And then these two little old ladies started throwing rice at us and all this kind of stuff. And I'm still like a deer caught in headlights. Now we've gone down there and gotten married and turned around and came right back. And we were probably gone less than an hour. The next morning I got up and I pulled my marriage license out and I left them laying out on the nightstand. And my mother's maid found them. And she handed my daddy the marriage license. And of course he took one look at it. And my daddy went and got his gun. And he said, I'm gonna go kill that son of a bitch.
He got in the car and took off. And Jerry was up at Sun Records at that time. Mama called Sam Phillips and said, Jay's on the way and he's got a gun. Is Jerry still there?
And Sam turned around and he looked at Jerry and he said, get in your car and get out of Memphis. So Jerry took off. Daddy drives up, barrels through the front door and says, where is that son of a bitch? And Sam sits Daddy down and tells him, we can't interfere in this life decision that's been made without you.
And he said, it looks to me like they love each other. And if we charge him, he's going to prison for a long time.
Daddy calms down. And he goes back home. And he tells Mom, we really don't have any choices because it's done. And we're going to have to hope for the best and learn to live with it.
It's against the law for married women to go to school in Tennessee, so 13-year-old Myra joins Jerry out on tour.
I didn't have a suitcase. The only thing I had was this round doll case that I had gotten at a Christmas or two before. And it was like a hat box, shaped like a hat box. And that's what I put my stuff in.
The next time JW sees Jerry is on stage at a gig in New York.
Jerry goes over to Daddy and he says, I love Myra, I'll take care of her. The music starts playing and it's accepted, it's forgotten. We went out and bought a little house. Actually, we bought the first house that had a for sale sign on it because we needed a house right away. I learned how to cook and learned how to vacuum. I had to become the adult. Jerry did two things. He played music and he loved me. He came home, he brought all the money to me, dumped it in my lap.
It was a cash business, and Myra was in charge of taking the bags full of cash from his live performances to the bank. You really are talking about shopping bags with dollar bills in them. The notion that she was a central piece of keeping the Jerry Lee Lewis business going as a young teenager, as a girl, is pretty wild.
The first few months of 1958 tick by, and Jerry's star continues to rise.
It was a time that had never happened before, never will happen again. And the reaction of the public and the audience that made me kind of gasp. Like, look at how these people are just going berserk about him.
There for a while, he was the top dog. They had the top songs in the world.
Out of all of these figures, these kings of rock and roll, Elvis was a brilliant performer. He was cute. He had this sort of angel face. But Jerry Lee Lewis could play the piano better than anyone that was a part of this whole Sun Records crew. And Jerry Lee Lewis was fun. And fun was a huge part of the birth of rock and roll.
Private Elvis Presley makes this a VIP event. But the rock and roll star, wearing medals for carbine, pistol, and tank gunnery marksmanship, is modest as can be.
When Elvis is drafted into the Army, Jerry Lee is poised to become the new king of rock and roll.
And then they booked a big tour for Jerry in Europe in May of '58.
Elvis never went to England. Elvis never formed off of United States soil. So for one of those first-generation rock and rollers to make that trip and go over to England was a big deal.
The tour will be a surefire success if Jerry will heed the advice of Sam Phillips and not do one thing.
Don't bring Myra on tour with you. Don't bring her to London. And he ignored all of that good advice. His ego, I think, stood in the way. He just thought he was untouchable.
I didn't even know that Jerry had been warned. And he said to them, either she goes or I don't. And I think Jerry intimidated him and said, don't you talk to her. Leave my wife alone.
Myra, her brother Rusty, and their mom Lois accompany the band to England.
When we got there, they were standing there at the airport and, people just wanted to see everybody, because we were the biggest celebrities there was at that time.
The press was going to come on the plane and see Jerry and interview him. So I got off, and I'm walking around in the airport, and a man comes up to me, and he says, who are you, miss? You got off that plane, didn't you? And I said, I'm not anybody. He said, well, who are you? And I said, I'm Jerry's wife. And the guy asked me how old I was, and I said, I'm 15. I figured I could lie a little bit. His face lit up like a Christmas tree, and he took off. I had no idea. I was talking to a reporter. And I'm clueless that there could be a problem. I wish that somebody would have said, if people find out Jerry's married to a kid, it ain't gonna be pretty. Myra, you're a bomb.
It's May 1958, and the news of 13-year-old Myra Lewis's marriage to Jerry Lee is about to erupt in the British press. Initially, Jerry's British fans give him a warm reception.
They were at the airport. They were out in the streets. They were in the lobby. People loved Jerry so much, they were hanging out of the hotel windows all around our hotel.
But the tone abruptly changes the following day.
The reporter followed up, figured out Myra was 13, figured out she was his cousin, and that Jerry Lee Lewis wasn't actually even divorced from his second wife yet. This was a bombshell.
The next morning, the news media said, Jerry Lee Lewis is here with his child bride, Myra.
He's a pedophile, he's a bigamist, he's a liar and a fraud. There's a call to boycott the shows, and very quickly, Jerry Lee finds himself playing to half-empty theaters where people are heckling and booing him.
And they went after Jerry Lee, they went after Myra. She was in the car with her mother and her little brother. The paparazzi surrounded the car and they were shaking it so violently, they thought the car was going to be turned over.
And Scotland Yard came to the hotel and told us, we can't guarantee your safety.
They end up coming back to America, where they hoped it would blow over, but nothing blew over.
Why did you leave?
Well, I
answer those questions, sir, my manager might knock my head off or something.
That one event turned our life upside down and changed the direction of everything. Nobody wanted to be a part of this.
Were you there, Mrs. Lewis?
I was there, but I wasn't at the show.
Oh, you weren't at the show. Oh, did you notice anything like that sort of reception?
No, it was a very good reception, I thought.
He went from making thousands of dollars a night down to making a few $100s a night. I felt guilty because of it. I didn't make it happen, but I didn't stop it from happening. And I could have, because I was the one who let the cat out of the bag.
After they came back and after his divorce was finalized, he remarried Myra so that there was no question that this was a marriage in good standing, but the damage was done.
It destroyed a man's career, but it didn't destroy our marriage. If anything, it made us stronger because we were attacked. We don't care what the world says or does. We should love each other.
Soon, Myra is overjoyed to learn that she's pregnant.
I always loved children. What I had wanted all my life was a house, a home, and a baby.
But a few months into her pregnancy, Myra is forced to leave her home.
Jerry wasn't having the income that he had, and he was the sole supporter of his mother, father, and 2 sisters. So my house got shut down, not theirs. And I had to go live with them in Fairday, Louisiana. It was not comfortable because they resented the fact that Jerry married me. It was not a fun situation to live in the house with those people. One day, Jerry walked into the room and he reached down and he picked up my typewriter and he held it above his head like he was gonna slam it down on me. And I looked up at him and it's like, what happened? And he threw it on the floor. And he said, one of his sisters, Linda Gale, told me that she was with you the other day and y'all were driving down the road and you were smoking a cigarette and flirting with a sailor. Neither one was true. The only reason she would tell him that was to make him mad at me.
But all is forgiven when Myra gives birth to a baby boy on February 27th, 1959.
Myra had Stevie when she was 14 years old, and she was thrilled. She knew she was pretty young to be having one, but still it was what she always wanted.
Oh, he was precious. He was a sweet baby. He was a smart baby. Jerry wanted to name him after Steve Allen for giving him his first break on nationwide television.
Myra is over the moon when they move back to Memphis and her mom, dad, and brother get to meet her baby boy.
It was great because it was like I had a little brother, you know, because I was with him all the time. And, you know, she was a great mama.
In 1960, the Lewises learn that Elvis has returned to Memphis from his stint in the Army. And just like Jerry, Elvis has fallen in love with a teenage girl.
Elvis Presley was in love with Priscilla when he was 24 and she was 14. Luckily for him, he had Jerry Lee Lewis's example.
Clearly, Elvis's team learned from the disaster of Jerry Lee and Myra and entered into the relationship with Priscilla in a very different way. Waited much longer on the marriage.
Priscilla Presley was beautiful and glamorous and did her hair and her makeup and was in the public eye. Jerry Lee didn't want Myra to be anything like Priscilla Presley. Myra was only to belong to him. He didn't want other men to be attracted to Myra in any way. Jerry Lee wanted Myra to be invisible.
I couldn't wear shorts. We had a swimming pool, and he didn't want me going swimming when there was other men out there. It was so uncalled for.
Only 17 years old, Myra submits to Jerry's demands and embraces her role as wife and mother. But nothing prepares her for what happens on Easter Sunday, 1962.
Myra was at home with her 3-year-old son, Stevie, her father-in-law, Elmo, and Jerry's uncle, George, and she was going to cook dinner. And she was asking Elmo what he wanted, and he was listing some things, and said, well, we better go inside and make a list. So she asked Uncle George, would you watch Stevie? And he said, sure. And so she and Helma went inside, and she wrote a grocery list. They went back outside.
And Uncle George was there, and Stevie wasn't. And I said, Uncle George, where'd Stevie go? He said, he went in the house with you. Well, didn't he go in the house with you? Ran in the house and looked for him. They came back out. There was this, he'd been playing with a hose. And he'd been pulling it. And I followed the hose around the house. And I looked, and the hose was in the swimming pool. And the water was rippling. And I started screaming.
Myra Lewis is 17 years old when her 3-year-old son drowns in a tragic accident.
Myra remembers almost nothing between the incident at the pool and the funeral. What she remembers is Jerry Lee picking her up off of Stevie's grave. She was lying on his grave and wouldn't leave because she wouldn't leave her child alone.
I was so heartbroken over losing Stevie. I mean, it was the most God's awful thing that could happen to any human on this earth.
There were times when she didn't want to go on. She didn't know if she could live without her baby, without her child. And then she got pregnant again. And it was with the birth of Phoebe that she realized she had to stay alive.
She just unbroke my heart. You know, she made me proud and happy to have a child again in my arms that I could hold and kiss, and gave me back something that I had lost. It was a welcoming, wonderful thing that happened.
In 1964, the Beatles conquer America and transform the sound of rock and roll. By this time, unable to repeat his success on the charts, Jerry Lee has left Sun Records. At home, he becomes increasingly controlling.
No matter what she did to try to please him, it was never enough. Nothing was ever good enough.
It ripped my self-esteem away from me. One night, Jerry was coming home, but I didn't know he was coming home that night. He said, I'm hungry, you gotta fix me something to eat. Okay. When a neighbor had made some spaghetti sauce for me, and I walked by him and he said, this don't taste like your spaghetti. And I said, fine, he made it and gave it to me. And he said, what? And he picked his tray up and threw it at me.
Jerry's bad behavior continues, even when he starts making a comeback in a new genre in the 1960s.
We're gonna play this old piano after I'm not here.
He never returns as a rock and roll star, but eventually moves into a much more straight-ahead country style.
When country music kind of became outlaw country and was more sort of open to rebellious figures, they welcomed Jerry Lee Lewis.
I started playing with him a lot and then went full time with him later on, you know, after I got out of high school.
When Another Place, Another Time shoots up the country charts in 1968, Jerry's career is on the ascent.
Jerry went from a little bit of success to more success to really being one of the most successful recording artists in the country music community by sort of the end of the 60s.
Jerry's second chance at fame is not enough to right his failing marriage.
When the good times came back for Jerry's career, things went to hell quickly. Jerry would turn into Jekyll and Hyde. Mid-afternoon, when Jerry was gone and gonna play a show that night, I'd talk to him. And he'd say things like, "Hey babe, what you doing?" Da-da-da-da-da. We'd just chit-chat, you know, normal. After the show, I could get a phone call from him. "Who the hell do you think you are telling me that I shouldn't drink liquor or something like this?" The next morning, Jerry would wake up and call me and say, "Hey babe, what you doing?" Jekyll and Hyde.
Jerry Lee, while he was on the road, began taking drugs, and Myra noticed a drastic difference in him. He would just be totally out of control, accusing her of cheating on him while he was out of town, which was totally not Myra. He had no evidence whatsoever. He was just high on drugs.
I would imagine Myra feeling completely overwhelmed and confused. These were prescription pills, you know, they were sort of like performance enhancers. They were marketed from doctors. There wasn't the knowledge that we have today. He became a raw nerve, yelling, screaming. I mean, Jerry Lee Lewis had a terrible temper and a lot of conflict, but you take all of that and then you combine it with amphetamines and booze and sleeplessness, it's like pouring lighter fuel on a fire.
Yeah, he slapped me. Yeah, he did. That's what he would do to people. He'd slap them in the face. But when he slapped me, I would end up on the floor because the force was too hard.
Then, 12 years into her marriage, Myra gets a phone call that will ultimately destroy the relationship. Jerry Lee has been living a double life.
I just fell apart. I couldn't take another day of it.
In 1970, Myra Lewis gets a phone call that shatters her belief in Jerry Lee.
The anonymous phone call was that Jerry had been seeing other women and just picking up women on the road, and it was something that had been ongoing for many years.
In fact, he had started cheating on her only 11 months after they first got married.
Myra is devastated. She runs down to her local church to seek solace.
I knelt down at the altar and I was crying so hard that I was not even able to say a word. But that was the moment of knowing without a doubt that this was not the man I was going to spend my life with. This was not what I bargained for. I think maybe in my heart I knew that it wasn't reasonable that a man goes out and plays music and drinks and takes drugs and there's women throwing themselves at him. It's not reasonable to think he's not gonna take advantage of that. But I could, because he told me he didn't. And when I realized that it was a lie, and it had been a lie for a very long time, I knew there was no going back.
Jerry is out of town. By the time he gets home, Myra and Phoebe have moved in with JW and Lois.
Jerry was continuously calling me, want me to come back to him and all this kind of stuff. And I went over to the house to get something, and I went in and I was in the den and I heard somebody going, "Get her out the window." Jerry was in our bedroom with a girl in his bed. And I walked in there and said, "Oh, no, yeah, you miss me and you love me and you want me back, right? And this is what you're doing, laying in my bed with another woman." So, I mean, I'd been gone 2 or 3 days.
He begged her to come back, But she wasn't falling for it.
And that's when she got that apartment. I went over and stayed with her while she was staying there, and they was getting her divorced. I was asleep and I heard glass break. And I ran down the stairs, and it was Jerry. He was trying to come through the window. Jerry saw me, and I said, "What do you think you're doing?" He said, "I just need to talk to Maya so you don't talk to her coming through the window."
I was married at 13, divorced at 26. Half of my life was spent with Jerry.
The leaving, of course, was hard. She had no education. She wasn't going to have any money because Jerry Lee didn't manage money well, and whatever they had it was spent whenever he made it. She did get some child support as long as she would go beg for it. Jerry did see Phoebe on a regular basis. Myra always felt absolutely certain that keeping that relationship between the father and daughter was an important thing to do.
Myra relocates to Atlanta, Georgia. But as she starts to rebuild her life, Jerry's starts to unravel. He's arrested for driving under the influence several times.
I was taking a lot of pills at the time, you know. Nobody had mentioned it to me. I said anything about it, and I didn't know that I was in that bad a shape.
Jerry has numerous weapons violations and accidentally shoots his bass player while drunk.
But just a couple of months after shooting his bass player, Jerry Lee shows up, drunk and belligerent, at Graceland, smashes his car into the front gates. He's yelling for Elvis to come down and pulls out his gun and starts firing that. And then is hauled in and arrested for that. That was the next example of chaos.
That was kind of around the same time when I decided to go into real estate. I'm here by myself. I've got a child to raise. What do I want to do?
She went back to school, got her GED. She then got her real estate license and eventually her broker's license. Myra was very successful in real estate in Atlanta, Georgia.
I was in the President's Club every year. I was a $1 million producer, and I loved every second of it.
She worked for Richard Williams. She was an agent in his firm. He was a divorced man, and she admired him immensely. And after 4 years, one day, he asked her to lunch, and the sparks flew, apparently, because they ended up getting married.
Richard Williams and I were married on June 1984. He's a gentleman. He's kind. He'll do anything in the world for me. He vacuums. I have somebody I can take care of and somebody that I know is going to take care of me. And it took a long time to get to it all, but it's been what I want.
After Myra's marriage to Richard, most news of Jerry continues to be troubling.
There are a series of marriages, many of which just end in terrible and tragic or suspect circumstances. One wife dies under very sketchy circumstances that, as reporters investigate, point toward his guilt and culpability in her death. And none of this is ever, in any serious way, investigated or explored by the authorities.
Really, sincerely, I would like to say one more time what a great honor it is to be back in London, England. I feel like this is home to me, you know. Well, this is where I first come over and I brought my little 13-year-old cousin with me. Remember that?
He was widely celebrated. He was inducted in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in the first class. Jerry Lee also was very distinct within that first generation of rock and roll. First of all, he stayed alive longer than the rest of them, but Jerry Lee Lewis was also in a class of his own when it came to bad behavior.
But then what's behind that is this remarkable woman who took something from that, who took something beyond just being scarred by it, and was able to turn her life into something else.
I mean, there's been so many blessings and so many good things and so much good spread through our life that you got to focus on that. I'm happy with myself right now. I'm happy with what I've got. I've learned some tremendous lessons about life. And if I had to do it all over again, I'd probably do it all over again.
The tape rolls, the city flickers awake in sodium orange, and somewhere between the L tracks and a lake that pretends to be an ocean, a name is swallowed by the wind. A corner store bulb buzzes and dies. A siren tests its throat. A delivery truck hisses steam like a tired dragon. Chicago, late autumn 1998, cold case, missing person, shock to the block, and the first clue is small enough to fit under a fingernail. A receipt torn at the timestamp, a gum wrapper folded on the diagonal, a voice on a payphone saying nothing, then breathing, then nothing again. The story likes to hide in the thin places, thin light, thin margins, thin patience. So we begin where nothing can be held, with a gust along North Avenue slicing between brick and glass, and a girl, no, a woman, no, a headline in waiting, walking out of frame. She was on her second shift and her third coffee, a bookstore cashier who knew the exact shelf where a city keeps its ghosts. She knew the fat novels that pretended they weren't about crime, knew the true crime paperbacks that pretended they were about justice. Knew every regular who bought a paper on Friday just to fold it into a pillow for the train. She smiled like someone who trusted the door would open when she pushed it. She wrote her name on name tags and never dotted the I with a heart. She wore a denim jacket with a burn on the cuff and said she'd fix it when I'm done with everything else, which is how you say never in the dialect of young and busy. Her last transaction was exact change, her last word into the camera was Gona, and her last shadow fell thin across a tile floor mopped to a squeak. 5 steps to the alley exit, 3 more to the back gate. 1 hinge that shrieked like an old theory. Then silence, then night, then a city that doesn't notice because who can afford to? The alley remembers. Plastic trash lids clatter when no one touches them. A cat the color of abandoned bourbon flicks into a slit of darkness. A motion sensor wakes at a phantom and throws a cone of white that cuts the world into 2 neat halves, here and not there. A delivery guy scratches his neck and swears he saw someone pass, quick, carrying nothing. Head down like rain made human. He shrugs, stamps his feet, vanishes with the newspapers. Cold front rolling, breath fogging. A payphone at the corner with a receiver that sticks. A bus shelter smeared with ads promising perfect skin, better credit, a second chance. She was supposed to turn right. She turned left. The city shrugged and let her. Morning opens its mouth and chews headlines, then chews them again. Young woman missing in Wicker Park. Friends fear foul play. The copy editor needs a stronger verb. The neighborhood needs a stronger lock. The mother needs a stronger heart. Police do the procedural, yellow tape, clipboards, cameras that take pictures of places where nothing is so that later, when something finally shows itself, you can pretend it was there all along. The manager says she left at 10:18. The bus driver says he didn't see her at 10:24. The bartender 2 doors down says he thinks he saw a denim cuff at 10:20, but that could have been the other girl who wears the eyeliner like commas. The alley offers a cracked bead bracelet. The bracelet does not explain itself. A detective picks it up with a pen, and the pen trembles, but that could just be the cold. On the second day, a pastor brings coffee and the kind of words that keep your hands busy, if not your mind. On the third day, a camera crew shows up with raincoats and empathy angles. On the fourth day, the lake throws something back, a log, a tire, a story about a man who swam too far. None of these are hers. The mother waits on the steps, listening to the house breathe. The father cleans the car twice in one afternoon. The sister rips tape off posters until her fingers raise welts. The city waits the way cities do, impatiently, then reverts to errands, rent, overtime, sleep. But the neighbors keep seeing her, a flash of jacket near Damon, a silhouette in a bakery window before daylight, a laugh that shatters on the sidewalk and leaves a piece embedded in the grout, leads thicken, then thin. The case file does the opposite. The color photocopier smears her mouth into a small gray cloud. Hours lime into weeks, weeks into a winter that means it, and then the first anniversary arrives like a whisper you have to lean away from to hear. 2 kids racing coins along the curb find a ring lodged in ice, not hers. A bodega owner surrenders a Polaroid of a regular who vanished in '92. Not her. A stranger calls once with a gravel voice and a riddle. He says, "Ask the shoe that doesn't match." He hangs up and the phone records nothing but its own dial tone. A second detective enters the scene with a tie that looks like late-night static. He doesn't believe in coincidences or villains with poetry in their mouths. He believes in vending machines, hallway coffee, and the way liars blink when they breathe. He builds the red string mosaic. The pins multiply. The thread knots like muscle. Someone jokes that the boss will need a bigger wall. No one laughs. The mother sends letters to herself so there's something to open every afternoon. The father sits in his car in the driveway and rehearses what he'll say to the person who doesn't exist yet, the one who will come to the door with the name and the reason and the apology that isn't. The city shifts. The block gets a new cafe with chalkboard menus and filigree foam. The alley gets a new lock. The bookstore gets a new owner who leaves the lights on until dawn as if brightness were a fence. The second detective transfers, the first retires, the file sleeps in a metal drawer that needs oil. Time hums, the kind that scrapes your bones smooth. It's not that anyone forgets, it's that remembering becomes part of the weather. Somewhere a teacher uses her disappearance to explain the concept of unsolved. Somewhere a journalist files a piece about the way some names refuse to settle. Somewhere a man on a bar stool says he knew her once and he would have walked her home if he'd known the night was a thief. Somewhere in the Museum of Lost Things, a denim sleeve and a receipt and a gum wrapper get their own little placard, provenance unknown. Then the city invents a miracle we will later call ordinary. A database listens to old evidence the way a choir listens to a held note. The police reopen the cold cases, initiative, renewed commitment, community trust. And the lab tech smiles because machines are patient where people are not. The bracelet goes back under a microscope that can see the planets in a flake of skin. Prints get read in a new alphabet. The unaware leave their signatures on beer cans and door handles and the backs of their own throats. One afternoon, a technician with a tattoo of an anchor magnifies a tiny empire of cells and stops breathing for exactly 4 seconds. The database blinks. A bell no one knew was installed. Rings. Match. The word is small enough to fit in a fortune cookie. It opens a room where no one has stepped in 7 years. A name tumbles out. A man whose rap sheet reads like a neighborhood map. Trespass here, drunk and disorderly there. A fight behind a bowling alley. A probation that lost interest in itself. He lived 4 blocks from the bookstore in 1998. He worked temp at a warehouse that sold furniture cheaper than it should have. He called his mother twice a month and left voicemails that apologized even before he spoke. He is not a monster in the way comic books prefer. He is a silhouette that rhymes with the alley. And the bracelet, the one found with the cold fused in its links, carries sweat that rhymes with him. The arrest happens quiet. Dawn, unremarkable doorway, men in plain coats who say sir and hands and this way. No media yet, no siren drama, just an address being collected and a neighbor's dog throwing tantrum against a window pane. They take him to a room that believes in 2 chairs, 1 table, and a camera winking in the ceiling. He sits like a man squeezing the brakes on a downhill bike. He says he doesn't know the woman, didn't go to that alley, doesn't even like bookstores because they smell like paper cuts. But the database is a chorus that doesn't stop at the first verse, and the old receipts learn new words, and a torn scrap from a shift schedule says he left early that night. A bus tracker from a defunct system remembers a card swipe 2 stops from the scene. The second detective, transferred not gone, returns as a guest star, flips a photo, and lets the silence do its regular job. He says, okay. He says, I was there. He says, I didn't touch her. He says, I only wanted a cigarette. He says, I heard a scream. He says, I ran. He says, I never told anyone because who would believe me and what good would it do? He says, everything except the one thing they need. Confession refuses to land. It circles, it drops nothing, it vanishes into cloud. The bracelet is not a wrist. The database is not a witness. The city wants clean endings and the headline writers are hungry, but the story keeps a kernel in its fist. The charge sheet swells anyway. Obstruction, tampering, the lesser satellites that cluster around a gravity too heavy to name. The press conference erects itself at noon. Microphones lean forward like metal flowers. The commander says, closure, as if the word were a lever. The mayor says, sends a message. The neighborhood says, finally, and then quiets, waiting for the feeling to match the statement. Chicago, 1998, cold case solved, the ticker chirps, and the wind repeats the word solved until it stops meaning anything but the way a mouth looks when it says it. The mother holds a photo and a tremor. The father squeezes a steering wheel until it remembers it is rubber. The sister walks the block twice and counts the lights that don't work. The bookstore, new owner, same squeak, turns the music down and rings a sale by mistake. People in offices click the article, skim, forward, forget. But in the drawer of a desk at the edge of the precinct, the file lies open like a throat that hasn't coughed out its last. There's a typed page that reads narrative and then stalls. There's a gap where a jacket should be, a distance between the bracelet and the wrist, a phone that breathed but never spoke. Witnesses crawl out of woodwork like old wallpaper, each with a version. A cabbie swears he picked her up at 10:27, took her 2 miles south, dropped her where the streetlights blinked out like a row of eyes closing. A barback claims he saw her arguing with a tall woman in a red coat. No, not red. Maroon. No, burgundy. With a voice that didn't match her face. A man with a dog says the dog barked at nothing for a full minute at 10:23, and that must count for something. A street musician remembers playing a song that made her stop and sway for a second, and in his memory the song is now a warning. The detectives nod right, and then the notes file themselves under possible, which is a polite drawer for maybe, which is a hallway to never. Tonight the L rattles like bones in a jar. A train window shivers with the city's reflection. Graffiti spells a name that no one knows the owner of. The lake hunches its shoulders and pretends it isn't listening. You stand where the alley meets the back gate and you feel the city's exhale on the soft of your wrist. The hinge no longer shrieks. Someone oiled it, but it remembers the sound. A motion light wakes, splits the scene into yes and no, then dies. Somewhere a newsroom schedules a follow-up on the solved case, and the editor barks for a kicker, something with punch, something with closure. But the tape keeps rolling past the press conference, past the cuffs, past the composure, down into the gap where a person disappears and a narrative tries to paste itself over the whole. The cold doesn't lift, the breath doesn't steady. The word solved looks in this light like a bridge that stops in the middle of the river, because a case can be solved on paper and still unsolved in the room where a family eats. Because an arrest can silence a headline and still leave the hinge screaming in your sleep. Because a database can sing, and a bracelet can sweat, and a man can say, okay, and I was there, and I ran, and still the city can look at itself in a wind-polished window and ask quietly, where did she go? The alley doesn't answer. It arranges its cans, it tucks its shadows, it smooths its cold. Somewhere an old payphone breathes. Somewhere a cat that looks like abandoned bourbon blinks and decides not to tell you what it knows. And the voice in your head keeps reading the line, cold case, shock to the block, solved, like a prayer you don't believe but can't stop saying, because what else is there at this hour but the hum of the city and the cadence of its unsleeping heart? And if you listen closely, under the official story, beneath the confident podium words, behind the match that rang like a bell, you can hear the city rehearse the one sentence it will never say out loud. Maybe we didn't solve what needed solving. Maybe we found the man who stood nearest to the silence and decided proximity would do. Maybe we closed the file because open things hurt, and this one was cutting everyone. Maybe the truth is less dramatic than the headlines and more cruel. Or maybe the truth is still out here, walking the alley that knows its name, slipping past the motion light, lifting the latch that doesn't scream anymore, stepping into the corridor between memory and fact with a denim cuff brushing brick, leaving behind nothing you can hold, not even a breath. The second wave hits after the first headline fades, when the city starts telling itself it already knows the ending and the dust decides it won't settle. The case breathes again in a small room with vinyl floors where boxes become furniture and old staples glitter like lost fishhooks. Evidence, 1998. One plastic bag with a bracelet colder than memory. One shift sheet with a coffee ring like a lunar eclipse. One disposable camera with half a roll of nothing and one frame of a door mid-swing. 5 anonymous tips typed in shaky caps. A photocopy of a map with a circle drawn around an alley and an arrow that points to nowhere. New hands touch old paper. New eyes learn the old glare of fluorescent bulbs. The lab's hum returns, patient, precise, merciless to nostalgia. Someone says, chain of custody, and the room shivers like it hears its full name. Outside, the Elkeens. November again, but years later, and the wind hasn't forgotten the route. You could call it routine, review interviews, chase the rumor that lived too long, knock on doors whose paint has learned to flake at the first knock. But routine mutates in cold cases. It grows teeth. It eats hours. It tells you this: either you missed something, or something missed you on purpose. The detective who transferred back for the solved press conference isn't sleeping through the night. He stands in his kitchen, reading the city like a book with pages stuck together. He circles a name on a page that was scanned so often it looks like fog. The name is the tall woman in the not red coat. Burgundy, maroon, choose your poison. Unnamed, untracked, unworried by the way people remember wrong in stereo. A coat can be a character. A color can be a lie. He writes "find her" on a yellow note and sticks it to his wallet because what you stick to money you won't forget. Back at the bookstore, new owner, same corners where dust spirals like tiny galaxies, a clerk finds a box under a staircase that isn't supposed to exist. It holds event flyers from a poetry night that died before Y2K, invoices for books no one bought, and one slim cassette with a handwritten label, "Staff Meeting, 10/15/98. The basement smells like wet cardboard and yesterday's rain." The clerk hands the tape over like a confession. The old detective borrows a tape player from a school that still teaches patience. It clicks, whirs, coughs up a voice like gravel and licorice. Laughter like forks in a drawer. Someone saying, "Back gate sticks again. Anyone got WD-40? Someone else saying, "Tell Tommy he knows a guy." Then a phrase that slides across the years and hooks. "If you leave after close, take Damon, not the alley. We got that weird caller again." The detective rewinds, plays it twice, writes the words by hand as if that pins them harder. Weird caller. Again, not once. A drum beat in the background, a metronome for worry, payphone, breathing, then nothing. The precinct digs up payphone logs like archaeologists sifting a desert for a ring. Back then, you could still call the world from a metal box, and no one would know it was you unless they cared enough to chase it. The phone company shrugs in present tense, but has an archive in past tense that lives in a warehouse that smells like insulation and surrender. A clerk finds a microfiche sleeve. A tech hisses at the machine like an animal coaxed back into its cage. Numbers glimmer like minnows in shallow water. A cluster on the week she vanished. All from the same booth, all to the store, all at closing, no voice recorded, just duration. 30 seconds, 15, a minute 23, empty space measured and cataloged like it was solid. The detective takes a photo of the microfiche screen with his own phone, which feels like cheating at time, and underlines the dates until the toner bleeds. At the corner where that payphone used to stand, there's a mural now. Two hands releasing a flock of paper cranes into a sunset that refuses to end. The bolts where the phone's pedestal stood are still in the concrete, capped and rusted like knuckles. A man selling tamales from a steel cart says the booth got ripped out in '02 after someone tried to set it on fire. He says he remembers the girl with the denim jacket because she helped a kid tie his shoe and said "double knot saves lives," and laughed like the cold couldn't touch her. He says a tall woman waited in the bus shelter the same night. "Red coat?" the detective asks. He squints, shakes his head. "More like wine," he says, which is either burgundy or maroon depending on how your memory drinks. The detective thanks him, buys 2 tamales, tucks both into his coat like warm opinions. Inside the lab, a technician with the anchor tattoo pulls a thread from the bracelet bag that everyone missed because it was the color of dust. Not fiber, not hair. Something synthetic, very late 90s. Elastic from a glove, maybe. The machine hums, reads, decides. A partial profile whispers a possibility, not the arrest they've got in hand. Not the man who said, "I was there and I ran." A third entity hums in the data like a bass note under a song you thought was solo. It doesn't prove a presence, it proves a community. The room goes quiet, which is how science claps. The tech prints a graph no one outside that room will ever really understand and slides it on top of the file like a blessing and a dare. There's a waitress at a diner on Milwaukee who collects stories the way other people collect magnets. She's seen the flyers. She's poured coffee for every journalist who tried to turn grief into paragraphs. She remembers the tall woman in the wine-colored coat because the woman didn't order, just stood by the door scanning faces like a customs officer. Her hands never left her pockets, the waitress says, but like she was holding something, not like she was cold. The detective sketches a rectangle in a pocket, size of a cassette, a wallet, a small knife, a phone from 1998 that weighed like a threat. He doesn't say the words out loud. The waitress points to a corner booth that doesn't exist anymore. She watched that seat like it owed her money. The detective writes it down because even changed spaces remember how they used to be if you ask with the right pen. The city coughs up an old parking ticket. It was written 2 blocks from the bookstore at 10:32 p.m., the night she vanished, to a beat-up sedan registered to a woman who moved to Peoria in 2001 and vanished from paperwork without vanishing from the world. The name smells like a placeholder. You say it, and it slips out of your mouth like it doesn't want a home. But the ticket has numbers on numbers, the officer ID, the device code, the timestamp down to the half minute. Audio from that officer's belt mic still lives in an attic of tapes no one cleaned out. They roll it. Tires, wind, the officer narrating tags to himself, then a voice off mic, female, low, saying, "It's handled." Another voice says, "By who?" The wind eats the answer. The detective closes his eyes and hears the hinge screaming again, the hinge that no longer screams. Reporters call the solved case a victory that took too long and a miracle that isn't pretty. They want the old detective on background to bless their adjectives. He says phrases like ongoing and cannot comment and respect the family. He says nothing about the pocket that held a rectangle. He says nothing about bass notes and data and voices that practice brevity. He walks past the lake and counts buoys like rosary beads. He dreams of string on a board taut enough to sound when plucked. He wakes with a word, conduit. He writes it next to find her. The sister agrees to another interview she doesn't want because you keep feeding the story or it starts feeding on you. She brings the denim jacket, mended now, burn marks stitched into a comet with silver thread. The studio lights flatten everything. The host says closure too many times, so the sister starts saying continuance just to hear a different rhythm hit the air. After, in the parking lot that smells like electrical storms, a woman leans out of a car and says she remembers a fight behind the bowling alley on the same block. Two women, one tall, one not, one trying to leave, one blocking the path like a turnstile that only takes regret as fair. She didn't call anyone because no one calls anyone about two women arguing on a city night. You mind your business and then you carry it like a stone. What color coat? The sister asks, barely moving her mouth. Wine, the woman says, like she's certain about one thing. The arrest sits in jail and practices innocence until it fits his tongue like a dental appliance. His public defender prints the word contamination and tapes it to his brain. The database sings his name too cleanly to ignore, but clean songs can still be incomplete. The detective visits, not for answers he knows he won't get, but to listen for the gap. The man says he ran because running was the only verb he knew in that decade. The city taught it like a catechism, and if a scream splits an alley, you pick a direction and you go. The detective remembers being 22 and learning the same prayer. He leaves without changing the temperature of the room. Paperwork breeds in the dark. A FOIA request returns with more black bars than alphabet. A retired meter reader remembers a night when a man in a cheap suit asked if any cameras on that block were real. They weren't. Not then. Now there are more cameras than faces, and they see everything except what the story needs. A community board meeting turns into a seance for facts. Someone says the city should rename the alley. Someone else says you don't honor a wound by tattooing it. The mother sits quietly and watches the lips of people who didn't know her daughter form opinions grand enough to sit on thrones. Later, at home, she puts ice in a glass and listens to it crack itself into the shape of her day. At the warehouse where the arrested man once worked temp, a manager produces a ledger, a fossil in lined paper, recording who clocked in with a pen because the machine was down. Next to a scribbled signature that tries to look like his is a second signature that attempts invisibility. The curls and bars are timid. The date matches. The time would have put them both on the street when the city swallowed her name. The detective traces the timid script like he could warm it into clarity. The manager says the timid one wore a coat the color of expensive wine and never took her hands out of her pockets. Now the story circles back to the payphone's empty pedestal because crimes love spirals. There's a new camera on the corner, pointed at the mural, because the district finally believes in eyes that don't blink. It doesn't help with history. It helps with faith. The detective stands where the phone used to be and feels the hum under the concrete where wires once carried voices like thin blood. He looks at the mural's cranes and thinks of cassettes and pockets and the way a hinge learns to be quiet when you decide not to hear it. He speaks into the wind because sometimes you have to say it out loud to make the city flinch. If it's solved, why am I still asking you? A bus exhales. A cyclist curses at a pothole older than both of them. A cloud pulls a gray coat over the sun. The detective's phone buzzes with a text from the lab. The elastic thread. Trace manufacturers narrowed to 3 brands sold mostly in hardware stores that smelled like basements and ghosts. One chain had a location 4 doors down from the bowling alley in 1998. The camera there back then was a dummy. The receipts might live in a banker's box with a brittle lid. The detective smiles without humor and heads for an address that exists in 2 times at once. Inside the box, registers printed on thermal paper that has faded to the color of reluctant tea. SKU codes like cipher keys, totals that look like they're lying. He holds a page to the light and a column returns from the dead. Gloves, 7 pairs, 1 size small, 1 early October, 1 cash payment, 1 initial scrawled so tenderly it could be a wound. TW. He thinks tall woman, he thinks wine coat. He thinks the alphabet is a trap and initials are decoys. He copies the page, tucks it into the file, and says her out loud because silence has owned her too long. He doesn't know her name yet, so he names the question. Who watched the booth? Who owned the pocket? Who learned the alley's breath like a prayer? Night lands fast. The city lights up the way anxious people do. Too bright. Too many bulbs, as if visibility were atonement. The detective walks the route she should have taken. Right turn, Damon, crowd, noise, witnesses who talk even when they don't mean to. He takes the turn she did. Left, alley, back gate, motion light, a world that splits into here and not there. The motion light wakes, forgives, sleeps. Somewhere a door creaks on purpose. Somewhere a cat saves its secrets for an owner it doesn't respect. Somewhere a family eats with an empty chair nobody comments on because the comment is a landmine with a fancy ribbon. And because this is a city that writes its own endings, then edits them overnight, a new tip lands as the detective reaches his car. Anonymous, monotone, recorded on a voice that sounds like it was flattened by a road roller. The message is short. It says, ask the bowling alley about the coat check. It says, ask who came back for something they didn't leave. It says, ask the shoe that didn't match. Then a click, a dial tone, an absence that sits in the passenger seat like a second shadow. The detective stares through the windshield at a block that keeps remaking itself and feels the case open like a window you were sure was painted shut. The headline sleeps in tomorrow's throat, already convinced of the word solved. But the night, polite as a thief, taps his shoulder and whispers, try again. The message gnaws at the edge of the night until it finds a way in, and by morning the city has decided to be gray on purpose. The detective parks 3 doors down from the bowling alley because he believes in the superstition that truth hates a front entrance. Inside, the varnish on the lanes shines like a lie told with confidence. Shoes thud, pins throw their arms up and fall as if rehearsing surrender, and the arcade machines blink like they're trying to Morse code a warning no one knows how to read. The coat check is a rectangle of counter, a wall of hooks, a jar of safety pins, and an old receipt spike fat with paper. The girl working it now wasn't born when the hinge shrieked. She chews gum like it owes her money and asks if he needs a claim ticket or a reason. He shows the badge without theater. She calls for the manager, who smells of shoe spray and a kind of tired that comes from counting other people's Saturdays. Old records live in a closet that calls itself an office. The manager shrugs, apologizes to the dust, and drags out banker's boxes labeled in a pen that knew better days. The detective sifts, coats, numbers, initials, lost and found entries for scarves, hats, 1 cufflink, 2 earrings, a single glove that looks guilty just for being alone. The boxes coughed up their era, 1998, the lignin yellow of receipts, the corners soft with handling. He finds a week with a hole burned into it. Second half of November, the pages thin where fingers paused too long. Friday, loud crowd, league standings posted, jukebox stuck on alt-rock that aged badly. Saturday, private party written in a slanted hand that believes it is fancier than reality. Sunday, quiet rain, a note that the roof leaks over lane 9. Thursday, the night she walked out of frame. The column for that Thursday tells a small story written to be ignored. Ticket 381. Bielk P. Coat M. Ticket 382. Bomber G. Ticket 383. Wool Wine Coat T. Ticket 384. No ticket, left with friend. The letters shiver under the fluorescent glare, and the detective hears the diner waitress say it again. Hands never left her pockets, like holding something, not like cold. Wool Wine Coat T. Initials pretend to be summaries. He flips the page, flips the day, flips the logic. At the bottom of the Thursday sheet, there's an asterisk and a box drawn around the words, unclaimed, 381, 383. 2 unclaimed, 1 black pea coat, 1 wine, both logged, both hung, both, allegedly, waiting for someone who didn't come back. But the Friday page carries a correction in a different pen. 381 picked up, late, no ticket, new description. Then another mark, a question eating itself. 383, still here? The manager rubs his jaw. We clear unclaimed every quarter, he says. Donate with a waiver, people sign, city's happy. He says a city can be happy in paperwork even when the people who make it can't. He says the 1998 donations would be ancient history in thrift rotations, rag factories, or the quiet funeral that is landfill. The detective nods like consent could make time reverse. But the closet office has a second jar on the shelf, one labeled Orphaned Pockets, a museum of the small things people leave in lining. Gum, ticket stubs, a hair tie, a folded prayer card. He pours the jar onto the desk, and the objects scatter into a constellation that no telescope can make sense of until 1 star glints the right way. A coat check stub, ripped, number almost gone but not quite. 383, attached by an old, seamed safety pin to a frayed loop of wool. The pin hadn't been through fabric in years, but metal remembers pressure the way skin remembers rings. The stub says that the wine coat was meant to be reunited with someone, and then it wasn't, and then somehow something else was reunited instead. The detective files that into the part of his head where math goes to shake hands with rumor. He asks about camera coverage. The manager points to a dome that arrived sometime after the city learned about liability the hard way. In '98, a dummy sat where the dome is now, a plastic eye blind as a cloud. He asks about old staff. The manager becomes a genealogist of shifts and tips and the ways people quit. He writes down 3 names with either the letter T or the shape of 1. 1 moved south, 1 married bad, and then disappeared into hyphenated documents. 1 died, the living will have to do. Will, if you ask the shoe that didn't match, it rolls toward you across 30 years and stops at your feet like a dog that isn't sure it wants your attention. Behind the counter that smells like the ghost of disinfectant, the rack of rentals shows its gaps. The detective flips through the binders where sizes go to get paired like arranged marriages. On the Thursday in question, the notes for pair 9.5 show 1 shoe checked in solo. Someone returned a left without a right or a right without a left. The clerk circled it, wrote weird, and underlined it twice, which is the teenage way to say, this bothers me more than I know how to explain. A single shoe is a riddle with laces. People steal shoes for all the common reasons. Drunk, dare, boredom. But a mismatch is a choreography. It means a swap, a hurry, a bleed of events that moved faster than the rules. The detective holds the orphan by the heel as if it might bite. The soul carries powder the color of alley dust and something slicker, oil maybe, or the hush of lane conditioner. Somewhere between the two the night slipped. He takes the shoe to the lab like a priest with a relic. He leaves it in hands that don't believe in miracles, only in methods, and returns to the block where the bowling alley crouches like a brick animal. In the daylight, the mural by the missing payphone looks brighter, a city's conscience painted in primer and hope. He walks the diagonal, coat check door to alley exit to back gate. The wind performs its old card trick, making receipts appear where there were none, flipping candy wrappers face up as if they, too, have something to confess. In the gouge of concrete near the dumpster, where 1,000 careless wheels have overruled geometry, he finds a quarter wedged tight. He pries it with his thumbnail until it sings loose. 1998, tail side up, eagle worn thin from somebody's lucky habit. He pockets it because the universe likes a small totem for when the big ones won't behave. Bowling alleys collect the kind of conversations that would never survive outside their echo. A league player with wrists like hammers says he remembers the wine coat, but only because the owner watched and never bowled. Another says the tall woman smoked outside so much the doorman scolded her for warping the entryway's draft. A third thinks maybe she worked at the hardware store, but he says that about any woman who knew where to buy a screwdriver and didn't ask for directions. Memory builds statues and then mistakes them for people. The detective writes, draws arrows, sketches a rectangle in a pocket again and again until the paper thins. The hardware store ledger, resurrected in part 2, gives up a new angle when the detective returns and asks to look not at sales, but at returns. Thermal paper ghosts say 7 pairs of gloves left the drawer. The returns column says 1 came back, size small, unopened, 2 days after the vanishing. The signature is careful this time, taller than shy, the T like a cross meant for display, the W tired. The clerk who processed it works mornings at a different store now and wears a name tag that says Marta, but answers to Hun. She blinks when he asks about the coat, stares off at the paint chip wall like the future is a color, and then remembers a scent, wool after rain, cigarettes mint-flavored, a clean perfume that could have been bought in a drugstore or smuggled from a magazine insert. She didn't look around, Marta says. She looked at the door behind me, like she was making sure someone wasn't coming in. The shoe comes back from the lab with a story it tells reluctantly. Lane oil, yes. Alley grit, yes. A hair caught where the insole meets the voice of the arch. Synthetic, the color of a shadow inside wine. Fibers from a coat, perhaps, or a scarf, or the lining of a pocket that learned to be useful. The lab can list ingredients but not recipes. It can hum notes but not sing the song. The anchor tattoo tech shows the graph again, the bass note of a third entity. Your guy, she says, meaning the arrested man, doesn't wear this shoe. Her finger taps the paperwork. He wears boots, heavy, too proud of their noise. The detective hears a scream of hinge. He files the weight of a boot in one mental drawer, the silence of a rental in another, and waits for the two to argue. Ask the bowling alley about the coat check, the message had said. Ask who came back for something they didn't leave. The desk jar yields another artifact when he questions the older cashier who worked weekends back then and now babysits the cash drawer like a dragon. She produces, from a little box that once held matches, a sliver of laminated paper with a printed warning. Coat check not responsible for items left inside. On the back, in that same slanted pen from the Thursday sheet, someone wrote a phone number and under it, an hour. 10:45. The number belongs to nobody now. The area code migrated. The line feeds a recorded voice that says the world changed and forgot to tell you. But the hour anchors itself like a nail through fabric. 10:45 is after she should have been home and before anyone knew to be scared. 10:45 is a time you call to retrieve something you can't afford to lose. The detective dials the orphaned number anyway, out of respect for rituals. He hears the dead tone, and then a click he tells himself is the building settling. He drives to the place on the block where a man once asked a meter reader if the cameras were real. The pole that held the dummy in '98 is now a real thing with a real eye connected to a real server that will someday be subpoenaed for a different night. He leans against cold metal and watches the street shift from working to washing. Floors mopped, provisions carried, doors locked with hands that know the number of turns by heart. A woman with a dog asks him for a light. He doesn't have one, and she nods like that's the right answer. As she leaves, he notices her shoes, bowling soles on sidewalk rubber, stitched like a decision. "You keep those?" he asks. She grins. "You think they want these back? They're haunted." Her laugh cuts the air into panels. He asks where she found them. She points to a thrift shop 2 turns away and says $30, tags still stuffed in the toe. He buys them there on a hunch's dime. The clerk says the donation came in bulk, 1 box, arrived with a waiver signed by a manager who is not the current manager, and a date from a year that matters. Inside one of those shoes is a scrap of paper, like all scraps of paper, printed, faded, stubborn. Not a claim ticket, not a receipt. A locker stub, the kind bowling alleys rent to league players who don't want to carry their lucky ball home. The number is smeared, but legible enough to tempt the present. The lockers along the west wall have been replaced, but the ghosts of their numbers still haunt the paint. He asks the manager about records. The manager talks about renovations like they're alibis. The detective asks to see the old locker doors if they were saved like cities save nothing until they suddenly save everything. A maintenance guy named Brody remembers a pallet of scrap in back, under tarps, near the rain that sneaks in through a roof seam that never learned manners. The pallet holds broken wood, bent hinges, and 3 doors that kept themselves together out of spite. On the inside of one, under a ribbon of adhesive that missed its appointment with removal, he finds a sticker, a cartoon shoe with a speech bubble that says, "Don't leave me behind," and a smaller sticker under it with a simplified diagram of a payphone, arrow pointed toward the corner where the mural stands now. Stickers don't testify, they point anyway. He pockets the stub, pockets the quarter, pockets the questions, and moves like a piece on a board you forgot had extra squares. The subway spits him near a storage facility because lockers breed lockers. The arrested man rented a unit once, small, paid cash until he didn't, let it lapse, lost it to auction. The facility manager remembers the auction because it rained and the boxes fell apart and the winner swore into the puddles. Inventory lists sit in a back binder. They speak in nouns so plain they feel like riddles. Clothes, books, cassettes. A small cardboard cube marked Vox. The winner resold as winners do to a second-hand shop that folded 2 winters later, whose unsold units went to a charity that prefers not to be named. The detective chases nouns through paper like a tourist who refuses to believe the museum is closed. At the charity warehouse, a volunteer with a bandana the color of ambulance lights leads him down an aisle that smells like elastic and old wood. They have cassettes, shelves of narratives taped in plastic, voices forever waiting for playback. He scans spines. Staff meeting, 10/15/98, had taught him what one cassette can hold. Here, a label stands out not for what it says, but for how it refuses to. A blank masking tape yellowed to the color of teeth, the ink on it smeared into obscenity by time. He pockets the ethics of this and holds the tape like an apology. Back at the precinct, vinyl floor room, boxes as furniture, staples like fishhooks. He borrows the school tape player again and accepts that the past is now a cassette economy. The machine takes the tape like it has been waiting for this brand of hurt. At first, it's static with ambition, then a tone like a test of the emergency broadcast system, then a telephone ring. Old, bell metal, textural, then a breath. The breath is human like a fingerprint is human. There's no mistaking the physiology of it. But what follows is a rehearsal, not a confession. A voice practicing sentences with the syllables shaved off. If you leave after close, stop. If anyone asks, stop. Tell Tommy, stop. Pages flip. The sound of a pen writing. A quiet okay in a register that can wear a red coat or a wine coat or a name that doesn't like light. Then the voice does something that turns the detective into a photograph of concentration. It counts. 10:20, 10:30, 10:45. The tape clicks as if the person pressed pause with a thumbnail bitten to the quick. The detective rewinds, plays it twice, then a third time, and the room's fluorescent hum suddenly sounds like applause or condemnation depending on the ear. He has the shoe that didn't match and the coat that wasn't claimed and the box of cassettes where someone practiced being the person the story would need. He has a bass note that says someone else sweated on the bracelet's metal. He has a payphone pedestal that went blind the year cameras learned to see. He has a message that says ask the coat check and a box that says Vox. His hand writes a name he doesn't know yet. His other hand circles the 10:45 until the pen threatens to bleed through to whatever truth lives below. He thinks about the sister stitching a comet over a burn, the mother listening to ice become her day, the arrested man asking if running can be a verb that saves you, the city calling solved because solved looks good next to noon. Outside, the L takes a breath and becomes thunder for 6 seconds. The mural cranes keep launching into a sunset that refuses to end. The detective walks to the corner where a phone once taught the city how to breathe into a receiver and say nothing. He presses his palm to the bolts left behind because metal keeps secrets at a temperature people can feel. He looks up at the dome camera and sees his reflection warped into a question mark. Somewhere a cat makes its own choices. Somewhere a tape waits for side B like a door waits for a hinge to become honest. He pulls the quarter from his pocket, the one with the eagle thinned by luck, and rolls it across his knuckles like the city is dealing him a hand he can't fold. When it drops, it doesn't ring like coins do. It thuds like a heartbeat against concrete. He thinks, not for the first time and not for the last, that a case can declare itself solved and still leave the air crowded with words that didn't get said. He thinks about the bowling alley's unpaired shoe and the glove elastic and the rectangle in a pocket someone never removed. He thinks about the locker stub that refuses to disintegrate and the cassette where someone rehearsed a kind of weather. He thinks about how the tall woman didn't need to bowl to win. He thinks about the way a city writes endings and then edits them overnight. And then, to the bolts that remember, to the wire that used to hum, to the hinge that learned to go silent, he says quietly, like a vow, we are not done. And the wind, which has always been the only witness that doesn't need to be sworn in, carries the words down the block toward the alley that knows its name. Side B sticks for a second like the past, reconsidering itself, then turns, and the first sound is a door that doesn't slam. It closes softly like someone taught it manners after the hinge learned to scream. The tape breathes. Footsteps count out a hallway's ribs. Paper rubs paper. A lighter flicks and fails and flicks again and wins. The same voice, low, the vowels filed to neutral, says a word so ordinary it glows. Tommy. Not a plea, not a warning, inventory. Tommy says the lock won't hold if you know where to push. A rustle. A scrape like a chair moved with respect for neighbors. 10:20, 10:30, 10:45, the voice rehearses again as if telling time could plug a hole. Then a second voice bleeds in, higher, grainy, like radio through a storm, close to the mic and too far from mercy. If anyone asks, the button clicks. Silence takes a seat between them. The detective lets the cassette run, hears air decide to be sound and then change its mind. Halfway through the reel, a clatter intrudes. Metal on tile, a coin or a key ring dropping and hitting the world in 3 little shocks. At the end, a snap, a breath, a whisper with consonants, sheathed. Okay. The machine eats the leader and stops. The detective presses his palms to the table and waits for the room to stop pretending it's still. Tommy. A name with the weight of a doorstop. Not a ghost, not a theory, not a rectangle in a pocket, someone you can ask for and get a shrug and a haven't seen him in forever. The bowling alley's employee rosters from '98 bloom like mold in the closet office, and there he is twice. Sunday maintenance, midweek nights when the leagues didn't crowd the oil with brag. Thomas W., pen lazy on the last name as if it didn't expect to be read by anyone but payroll. The initials rise like a fish you weren't fishing for, TW. The hardware store return slip wrote those letters like it was writing to itself. The coat check ledger wrote a wine-colored coat and the letter T like a hinge about to admit a mistake. He finds Tommy in the way cold cases find anybody. Not in a phone book, but in a pile of small debts the city keeps in shoeboxes. 2 parking violations with the wrong year neatly corrected. A complaint about a noise that wasn't music. A temp agency's carbon copy with a coffee stain like a continent. The addresses orbit the alley like satellites with dying batteries. One leads to a building that grew a yoga studio where a locksmith used to live. One ends at a boarded door that learned to be beautiful with graffiti. One still answers, a second-floor walk-up with a stairwell that smells like old lemons and shoe rubber. A woman in slippers opens the door and sees the detective the way you see a weather change. Not surprised, not pleased, adjusted for. "Tommy?" she repeats, tasting the vowel like it could poison. She says he left boxes, left tools, left a jacket the color of borrowed smoke, left the habit of leaving. She says he worked nights because days were taken by a promise he refused to name. She says he fixed everything in the building except what was wrong with himself. She says the last time she saw him, he had a rectangular outline in his pocket the size of a cassette or a pack of cigarettes or an apology. The detective asks if he ever wore a wine-colored coat. She laughs and slaps the doorframe like it said something rude. Tommy wore denim, she says, or the kind of jacket that pretends to be leather from across the street. She squints at the badge, her eyes switching channels between then and now. But she did, she adds a beat late. The woman who came for him when he didn't come for himself. He waits because the city only gives you one more sentence when you deserve none. She says the woman didn't climb the stairs so much as own them. Tall, pocketed, wool that swallowed light, mint cigarettes, cheap perfume elevated by conviction. She knocked the way thieves knock when they need you to think they're cops. She used Tommy's name like a leash. She never looked away from the hallway door like she expected it to learn its lesson and open. She said she'd meet him by the lanes, the woman says. She said 10:45 like it was a password. Then the memory closes the blinds and the woman returns to the present, which is slippers and a TV show laughing at itself down the hall. At the alley, behind the wall where the coat check rectangle hides its hooks, a service corridor runs thin as a rumor from the front counter to the back gate. The detective hadn't earned it yet, so it hadn't shown up. Now that he has a name and an hour, the corridor reveals itself like a smirk. A metal door sits at the midpoint, painted a zealot's white. The manager says it used to stick. The maintenance log from '98, brittle as pie crust, notes, side door, push at hinge, not handle. Tommy's handwriting slouches through the margin. He'd learned to lock the way people learn each other. He'd told someone. The tape had memorized his advice. The lock won't hold if you know where to push. The detective runs his palm along the jamb and feels the paint scallop where hands taught it a lesson. He presses without force and the door admits him with the meekness of an accomplice. The corridor leads to the back gate that once sang through the city. The night wind's path blooms in the dust. On the cinderblock wall, an old arrow rendered in paint pen points not out to the alley but sideways, toward a storage nook where tall racks used to hold League's forlorn bags. Now the nook is shelves of parts and the occasional anticlimax, used pins with necks bruised from their work, busted house balls with finger holes like surprised mouths, a drawer of orphan keys. He tips the drawer into a baking sheet, the way you pan for gold because you saw it once in a movie, and lets metal sound like hail. Key tags chatter, L9, bath, ELEC, off, CK, CK2. Two marked CK are coat check lockers, old retired when the city learned the words liability and insurance claims speak fluent litigation. One tag is scarred down to a scar that used to be a number. He tries it anyway because the present owes the past a few jokes. It opens a forgotten locker door with the sulk of a hinge that missed its encore. Inside, air that has not been out for years, the dust ghost of a rectangle long removed, and a sticker, the twin of the one on the old locker door in the scrap pallet, a cartoon shoe still pleading, "Don't leave me behind." The dust ghost of a rectangle crowns the inside of the door exactly where Panic would jam a cassette for one last rehearsal. He imagines a hand reaching into a pocket and drawing out the future in black plastic, tucking it into the locker between games, between breaths, between decisions. He imagines a return, delayed, the rectangle gone, its absence the shape of a plan completed or aborted. He shines his phone's flashlight at the back wall and catches the pale outline of adhesive that held a paper once, a schedule, a map, a number. He doesn't have the paper. He has the absence, which is the city's favorite artifact. Tommy's file at the temp agency says he loved lanes more than they loved him. He oiled them, he cleaned them, he swore at them in a whisper because machines behave better if you save your yelling for after. He knew the back of the bowling alley like a priest knows a sacristy. He was 2 doors down from the bookstore at 10:18 on nights he wasn't supposed to be. He could pick the gate's scream out of a choir, On the week the city swallowed the cashier's name, Tommy clocked out early twice, called in late once, and signed a maintenance log that reads like a confession if you tilt your head. Door adjusted, hinge quieted. The detective reads the entry 3 times, and each time it sounds less like a repair and more like an erasure. Quiet hinges are what stories like this eat for protein. The lab returns the orphan shoe's tail with an addendum dressed as a footnote. Embedded in the arch glue, a tiny glitter that isn't glitter. Mica from lane conditioner, yes, but also a crystalline fleck common to the powder on a brand of disposable pocket cassette recorders circa the late 90s. The kind of dust that falls when you open a shell to take a tape out the wrong way and put it back faster than you should. The tech shows him the spectrum readouts like synopses in a language no one speaks casually. It's not a match to a particular machine, she says. It's a match to a habit. He thinks of the rectangle's dust ghost inside the locker. He thinks of the voice counting time, the other voice cutting sentences at the second word. He finds Tommy's mother in a neighborhood that learned to spell gentrification with relish and regret. She keeps a kitchen that would pass a health inspection, a gold-framed photo of a boy who became a silhouette before the camera could catch up, and a drawer full of warranties for appliances that died obediently. She says Tommy didn't leave. Tommy wandered off like thought. She says he sent postcards from streets he wasn't on. She says a woman came once, winecoat, mint cigarettes, saying she had a message. The message was 3 words, he's helping now. The mother held the phrase too long, and it changed shapes, consolation to ransom to threat and back again. Helping who, the detective asks. She stirs tea that does not need stirring. The city, she says, as if that were a person you could place under oath. At the thrift shop, where the donated box of shoes, with tags stuffed in toes, learned to call itself inventory, the owner's ledger includes a note the length of a sigh. Bulk from Alley, no claim, signed by MGR, mid-99, keep some for retro display. Underneath an initial with 2 strokes, T with a flourish, W with its knees knocked together. The detective traces the ink as if his finger could pull heat back into it. He tries on the idea that Tommy, a man who fixed hinges and quieted doors and signed away shoes, was the conduit, not the knife. He tries on the alternate idea that an accomplice is just a hinge with better PR. He doesn't let either fit too well. The city punishes certainty. The sister meets him at the mural by the missing payphone. She's carrying the denim jacket stitched with a comet and a pencil worn short by lists. She doesn't want to hear progress. She wants verbs that sweat. He tells her about Tommy in the corridor and the coat check stub and the rectangle's dust ghost. He tells her 10:45 is a clock they can wind. She listens without blinking because blinking erases seconds, and seconds are what this story believes in. She asks if the wine coat knew her sister's name. He says the coat knew everything except kindness. She nods, then tells him something she never says on camera. Her sister used to tuck cassette labels under the clear window instead of on top so they couldn't peel. If there's a tape out there that matters, it will hide its name like a witness in the wrong neighborhood. The charity warehouse puts the detective on a first-name basis with dust. He pulls another milk crate of cassettes and reads the blank spines like prayer beads. One case rattles loose, not because it wants to be found, but because the shelf beneath it surrenders. Inside, a recorder sleeps without batteries. Its red REC button worn white by thumbs. The back is open. The inside has the same crystalline fleck the lab sang about. There's no tape. There is, tucked in the battery well as if hiding from a search warrant, a torn slip of paper with a hand-scrawled line. Damon, coach door, press hinge. Below it, a number that changed area codes while everyone was busy pretending time didn't have hands. He can't call the past. He can put his hands on the present door and press where the note told him to. He takes the recorder, photographed, logged, swabbed, sin confessed, and stands again in the service corridor with the zealot white door that learned to obey pressure. He presses. The latch flickers. He times it. 10:20, 10:30, 10:45. He presses again, and the door obeys the rhythm, opening faster under a practiced hand. This is choreography. The not red coat in the coat check line, not to claim but to abandon. The locker stub tucked in a shoe that will go missing and then reappear righteous at a thrift. The rectangle rehearsing sentences and timestamps. The hinge quieted. The alley ready to inherit the consequence. He can hear the path as clearly as he hears the L, a city's breath in tracks. He asks the bowling alley to indulge one unkind experiment. Lights down, jukebox off, lanes asleep. The coat check closed. Staff at stations like ghosts on payroll. He stands at the front counter with a rental shoe in his left hand and the recorder in his right. He moves the way the message suggested. Coat check, service corridor, hinge, gate. The motion sensor wakes in a cone that splits the world into yes and no, and then falls back to dark. It takes him 24 seconds to reach the gate if he doesn't run, 19 if he does. The recorded voice counting time fits. The breath between numbers maps to the steps between doors. He returns to the counter and tries again, following the detour drawn by the old paint pen arrow, to the nook, to the locker, to the dust ghost of a rectangle, to the corridor, to the gate, 21. The difference is a pocket and a plan. He considers Tommy's part, and it scratches at him like wool. A conduit, a caretaker of doors, a man who quieted hinges for people who needed them loud. Did he expect to be thanked? Did he expect anything? The woman in the wine coat. She moved through the lanes like someone who never asked a place for permission. If she had a claim ticket, it was for a story she believed she had purchased in advance. If she had a mismatched shoe, it was so the ground would forget how her weight sounded. If she had a cassette, it was so she could practice being a person who could say, "If you leave after close, take Damon, not the alley," without her hands shaking. The arrested man, boots proud of their noise, still belongs to the database and the bracelet and the charge sheet crowded with satellites. But satellites orbit something. The bass note in the lab's graph hums in his ear when the room goes quiet. The detective starts to say the word accomplice and stops because it makes people think of hand signals and split money. He prefers arrangement. Arrangements are human. They're what you do when you can't do it alone and you want to say later that you didn't, technically. He adds a column to the board in the small room with vinyl floors. Arrangements. Under it, he pins the coat check stub, the locker dust ghost, the elastic thread from the bracelet that dated itself by brand, the shoe that didn't match, Tommy's maintenance note about quieting a hinge, the thrift ledger with initials trying to hide in plain ink, the cassette without a label, and the words on the slip from the battery well, press hinge. He drives the route from the bookstore to the alley, to the bowling alley, to the hardware store, to the stairwell where the woman in slippers keeps the past folded in a drawer. The city drapes itself over the day like a coat that fits everywhere except at the shoulders. He stops at a crosswalk where the light takes longer than justice. A bus sighs. A boy dribbles a basketball across history. A woman in a wine coat is nobody on this street because coats repeat. That's how they get away with it. He realizes the color mattered because people remembered it, not because it was proof. Proof is heavier. Proof leaves a dent in a locker door where a rectangle slept. Proof is a shoe that comes back wrong. Proof is a hinge that knows a name. Night returns, punctual, smudged. He stands by the mural where the payphone once told the city it could speak anonymously and live. He places the recorder from the charity crate on the pedestal's old bolts as if he were giving a museum back one of its stolen things. He presses the red button and says into the dark what the case refuses to let him stop repeating. 10:20, 10:30, 10:45. His voice comes back thinner. The wind takes the numbers and shreds them into confetti the alley doesn't throw. Somewhere, someone hears a rehearsal and mistakes it for a memory. Somewhere, a cat evaluates him and selects indifference. Somewhere, the hinge that learned to be quiet recalls its screams like a bedtime story for metal. He doesn't have the name for the coat yet. He will. He doesn't have Tommy in a chair. He might never. He doesn't have the tape that was recorded for the night that matters, the one that didn't practice. It's out there if out there exists, nested in a box labeled Vox or buried in a wall that answers to a different landlord. What he has is a city that likes to claim closure at noon and unlearn it by midnight. What he has is a family who eats with an empty chair because commentary doesn't fill plates. What he has is a solved headline stapled to an unsolved air. He pockets the quarter with the thin eagle, checks the service door one more time, presses where the hinge remembers, and feels the latch not resist at all. In the distance, the L throws its voice. The mural cranes refuse to stop leaving. The bowling alley's sign flickers and then commits. The detective walks the block, a rectangle of steps he has worn into the pavement without leaving a mark anyone else will see, and murmurs a sentence that is not bravado and not surrender. We're close enough to be wrong. The night takes the sentence and files it with the other things people say when they are reaching for a shape in the dark. He imagines the wine coat at the counter, the stub in her hand, the smile that practiced truth like it was theater, the pocket that held a recorder and a script in the habit of counting down. He imagines Tommy in the service corridor, palm on paint, whispering to a hinge that never forgot how to answer. He imagines the alley, the breath, the step that carried her out of frame. And then he imagines the door not closing but pausing, just long enough to promise one more part of the story will make itself known, and then he turns back to the room with vinyl floors and fishhook staples and says to the file, to the city, to the voice on the tape, to the name the wind keeps swallowing, keep talking. The city wakes like a witness who slept with the TV on, static in the blood, headlines in the teeth, and the file is open before the sun decides what color to be. The small room hums with fluorescent pennants. The detective takes inventory the way sailors count knots. One shoe that came back wrong, one hinge that forgot how to scream, one rectangle's dust ghost inside a locker that learned discretion, one cassette that practiced time like an alibi, one maintenance man whose initials show up where they don't belong, one woman in a wine coat whose pockets carry a script, one arrested man whose boots announce themselves like brass. Arrangements, he says to the air, and the staples on the box glint like they approve. He starts with the hour that learned to talk. 10:20, 10:30, 10:45. He draws them on the whiteboard in a thin, unwavering line. 3 marks like subway stops on a route that never added weekend service. He pins a photocopy of the coat check page where 383 pretended to wait for a reunion that never arrived. He pins a thermal receipt for gloves that left and came back like a bad idea. He pins the thrift ledger where initials claim to be coincidence. He pins a map of the bowling alley with a narrow artery traced in red from counter to corridor to gate. He stares until the red line becomes a pulse, and the pulse becomes a drum, and the drum becomes a cadence anyone could learn if they held the recorder that taught it. Phones make their daily vow to ring only when hands are full. The detective ignores them like a penitent. He visits the bowling alley at the hour the city pretends nothing happens. The manager's keys jangle like contrition. In the coat closet behind coat check, where only staff should go and everyone eventually goes, he finds a second drawer of orphans, the sort of artifacts nobody writes into policy. A bag of lost buttons, a stack of unspent jukebox credits, a dozen claims nobody claimed. At the bottom is a canvas pouch the size of a paperback. Inside, 2 breath mints fossilized into their wrappers, and a strip of film negatives that forgot they were supposed to be pictures. He holds them to the light. Blocks of dark, blocks of darker, then one frame where white slashes across black like lightning. A door mid-close. The same goes from the disposable camera in the bookstore box, as if the city wanted to shake the Polaroid twice. He pockets the strip into evidence, which is a long word for please cooperate. The waitress at the diner gives him more coffee than his body can forgive and a name she's been forgetting on purpose. Lydia, she says, stirring a sugar that never dissolves. Tall like a promise you don't believe in. Coat like a confession you can't sell back. She doesn't know the last name. She knows the habits. Back booth, edge seat, eyes on the door, pockets weighted, mint smolder. A woman like that leaves sigils, not footprints. He runs Lydia through a database built to sort out mess from messier, and 20 come back, then 12, then 3. 1, Lydia W. Worked coat check at the alley for 6 weeks in '98 and left without a forwarding, which is one way to say vanished without asking the city for permission. The manager's memory tries to wear that Lydia's face and fails. Staff churned like lane oil when the leagues got thin. He files her under arrangements with a pin he pushes a little too hard. Tommy runs parallel to Lydia like train tracks that refuse to meet. The neighbor in slippers remembers her knock. The maintenance logs remember his hand. A janitor from the hardware store, the kind who outlives owners, remembers a kid coming in late, asking for the exact hinge the bowling alley uses, saying the door was tired, saying push at the hinge like it was scripture. The janitor remembers the wine coat coming in after and asking for a second hinge and paying cash with bills folded into quarters so they'd look thicker. Her voice could have cut bread, he says. The detective copies it all into the book that keeps him honest. Voice like a blade, money folded, habit of second purchases, the way arrangements breed arrangements. The lab hums into the day with a note he recognizes, patience bordering on menace. The anchor tattoo tech shows him an overlay, the elastic fiber from the bracelet, the synthetic hair from the orphan shoe, the crystalline flex from the cassette recorder's insides, all variants of the same era singing in different keys. You're chasing a year, she says, not a person. He nods like that's not the point and is precisely the point. Can you tell me anything that makes a courtroom sit up? She shrugs the way science shrugs when it refuses to lie. I can tell you this, the third profile is consistent across 2 objects that should never have met if the story ends where the press conference says it ended. Consistent. The word slides into the file like a blade into its sheath. He drives the route again, this time with the cassette recorder from the charity crate riding shotgun like a friend you can't trust. He stops at the bookstore and watches the new cashier ring up paperbacks with hands that have never learned to fear a hinge. He stands in the aisle where the disposable camera clicked a door mid-swing and imagines the breath between frames. He steps into the alley that inherited too much. The gate wakes the motion sensor into harsh geometry. Yes, no, here, not there, truth, arrangement. He presses the service door and it remembers his palm like a password. He holds still to see what the night does when no one tells it what to be. A siren elsewhere auditions for relevance. A cat sizes him for a future it won't share. The alley waits, which is the most honest thing it does. He takes the recorder back to the small room, dubs the tape, slows it until vowels separate. The voice that says Tommy remains a neutralized geography, hard to place, unbeholden to region. The counting voice, 10:20, 10:30, 10:45, has a rasp like mint smoke dragged over winter. He feeds the audio into software that likes to call itself analysis and watches the waveforms redraw the city into math. On the 10:45, there's a hitch, a tiny intake, a microsecond of fight or flee, like the speaker saw something it didn't rehearse. He prints the waveform and pins it to the board under arrangements with a note. Panic breath. He circles it in red, then realizes he's drawing a mouth open in surprise. Lydia W. becomes a map. Employment at the alley, 6 weeks. A short stint at the hardware store, seasonal, long enough to earn a discount on gloves. A rental in a building Tommy once repaired twice for a landlord who returns calls at the speed of erosion. A traffic ticket 2 blocks from the bowling alley, 10:32 p.m., the night the city swallowed a name. The officer's belt mic caught a female voice saying, "It's handled," and a wind eating the noun. He asks records to pull the officer's handheld log. The pencil groove at 10:33 is deeper than the line deserves. He imagines Lydia standing by a car she knows will be remembered by no one, pockets heavy, coat claiming more attention than a face. He imagines her watching a door in her mind, even in the street. The arrested man becomes less a culprit and more an intersection. He ran, he says. He was there, he says. He didn't, he insists. His boots are proud, the lab says. His sweat sang on the bracelet, the database says. Arrangements orbit him like satellites wired with old batteries. The detective visits again and listens for remorse he doesn't deserve or certainty he can't afford. If she screamed, the man says, voice turned to ash, it wasn't for me. The detective writes the sentence down even though it won't hold weight in any room that decides things. A journalist calls to request a quote to glue to a story about community healing. He declines politely, which is a trick he learned the hard way. He walks instead to the mural where paper cranes fly forever into a sunset that refuses to finish, and he meets the sister. She asks if the recorder will ever give them the voice they need. He says the recorder has already given them a rhythm. Rhythm isn't justice, she says, eyes steady. But it's a start, he offers, because he has to give her something that isn't air. She shows him a Polaroid he hasn't seen, her sister at a counter, a claim ticket held between fingers like a joke no one else gets. The number in the corner, half visible, could be anything until it insists on being 383. It was a prop, the sister says. She did everything like it was stage business. She'd hold a pen even when she wasn't writing. She'd keep change in her hand like she might decide the world needed buying. The thrift store yields one more breadcrumb because the universe is occasionally sentimental. A clerk digging in a drawer for a price gun finds a snarl of old tags and fishing line loops, and caught in the tangle is a key fob from the bowling alley's old lockers. On its back, someone has scratched a map with a bobby pin, a rectangle for the counter, a corridor for the service, a star at the hinge. Underneath, the number 1045. The clerk laughs at the coincidence. The detective doesn't. He bags it for evidence, not because it will survive cross, but because talismans are real when cases refuse to be. He goes looking for Lydia like the city hides treasures and mistakes in the same drawer. One address is a laundromat now, humming absolution. Another is a studio above a nail salon that speaks in acetone and gossip. The current tenant says a tall woman used to get her cuticles done without making conversation. The kind of client you don't ask, "Where do you work?" because the answer makes the room colder. A third address is a P.O. box that swallowed a decade. He files a subpoena like a prayer to bureaucracy. The return will be numbers in a table pretending not to be a face. Tommy becomes a roomer with fingerprints. The temp agency remembers he could fix machines that came from countries he'd never visit. The bowling alley remembers he could make a 16th note on a lane oil applicator sound like a lullaby. The neighbor in slippers remembers he loved the word okay because it let you move forward without promising anything. The mother remembers the postcards that came from streets he didn't stand on. He's helping now, the winecoat said, like Mercy had an intern. The detective wonders if helping meant lifting hinges out of sentences so doors would stop arguing with plans. He revisits the charity warehouse and looks for boxes that hum. In the corner where electronics go to retire, a crate of old answering machines leans against itself like a house of tired ideas. He plugs them in, one by one, plays the tapes companies told people to throw away. You hear marriages arguing with weather. You hear salesmen learning to hate their voices. You hear a city practicing anonymity into a performance. On machine 7, a female voice starts to leave a message and never finishes. If you leave after close, click. He rewinds. The rasp is there, the mint. He burns the audio onto a disc like it's 2001 and returns to the lab where the anchor tattoo tech raises an eyebrow that means, "Are we building a choir?" "Listen to the breath," he says. She does. "Same hitch," she says. Same mouth, learning the same fear. Consistency. He pins a copy of the spectrogram next to the panic breath graph. His board looks like modern art that bit its own tongue. Night again because the case is a sundial in winter. He walks the route, recorder in pocket like a talisman, quarter rolling between knuckles like a metronome. At the coat check counter, someone has taped a handwritten sign. Today's, not 1998's. Not responsible for lost items. He grins without joy. Responsibility floats. Accountability weighs. He presses the hinge and hears the door negotiate with its past. In the alley, the wind takes attendance and declares a quorum. He says the hour out loud because numbers in the dark are spells, 10:20, 10:30, 10:45. A window opens in the building across and a television laughs without context. He knows the next move isn't clever, it's patient. He drafts a list for subpoenas like a shopping list written in ink that stains. Employment forms, payroll for Lydia W., temp logs for Thomas W. Thrift intake waivers, hardware purchase orders, traffic court belt mic originals, coin-op phone records that survive privatization by accident. He drafts a second list for feet. Knock this door, ask that manager, find the meter reader who believed in fake cameras, sit with the mother without making promises, walk the sister to the mural and let her talk until the cranes fly in a new direction. He tapes both lists to the wall because the mind drops things when the heart runs the marathon alone. And then he does the one thing voiceovers never admit to. He goes home for an hour and stares at a ceiling that knows too much. He hears the city breathe through the cracked paint. He hears the recorder's red button click in his hand from habit. He hears the hinge in his building's stairwell complain. He presses it and it listens because goodwill is still a kind of technology. He sets the quarter on the nightstand, the eagle thin as luck, and closes his eyes for the length of a traffic light. When he wakes, the room has not solved the case for him. The lists are still lists, the hour is still a drum, but the breath in his chest has decided to cooperate, and sometimes that's how you move the next inch. He returns to the small room with the vinyl floor and the fishhook staples and the board that looks like a storm diagram. He writes one more word under arrangements, careful, a little ashamed of the hope it implies. Witness. Not in the legal sense, not yet. In the city's sense. Someone stood at the counter and watched a wine coat practice ownership. Someone noticed a rectangle slip into a locker and leave without a label. Someone kept a claim ticket because they liked how the number felt in their palm. Someone heard a voice count down and thought it was music. Someone saw Tommy push a door at the hinge and decided to learn. The city is always watching itself, always. The problem is that it forgets to remember. He sets his pen down, feels the night gather its tools, and tells the tape in the precinct player. Side A, side B, the leader held with scotch tape and faith. One more time. Because repetition is either obsession or devotion, and this case doesn't care which language you speak if you keep speaking. The city pretends noon is neutral, but today it leans, weight on the past, elbow on the counter where claim tickets learn how to lie. The detective starts by making the case smaller, which is the trick you use when it grew too big. He shrinks it to the square of a locker door, the length of a service corridor, the seconds between 10:20 and 10:45, the size of a cassette that teaches a voice to behave. He takes the coat check stub, number 383, and places it beside the thrift ledger initials, beside the hardware return slip with its careful TW, beside the Polaroid where a hand lifts a ticket like a joke. The constellation is tight enough to breathe on. He breathes. He goes back to the bowling alley with a bag that rattles like choices. Inside, gloves from the same brand the lab married to the bracelet's elastic, a dummy cassette recorder with its back open, a rental shoe twin to the orphan, a strip of negative that fell out of a canvas pouch like a confession in pieces. He asks the manager to let him stage a noon that remembers midnight. Staff eye him like a magician at a children's party, skeptical but hungry for a trick. He doesn't promise rabbits. He wants them to feel the rhythm in their feet. He posts one kid at coat check with a script whose lines are only numbers, 10:20, 10:30, 10:45. He sets a second at the service door with a hand trained to press the hinge on cue. He gives a third the recorder and tells them to count down in a voice that tries not to sound like itself. He places the orphan's twin shoe under the counter with a note, returned alone. He tapes the strip of negative above the hook labeled 383 so the lightning slash stares at anyone who reaches. He stands at the counter, then at the corridor, then at the gate, then back, until the geometry of the place becomes a heartbeat he can sync to. On the first run, they miss each other like strangers on opposite escalators. On the second, the hinge gives up early. The cone of the motion sensor cuts the scene into good and bad theater. Someone laughs because the tension went slack. On the third, the numbers line up. 10:20 at the coat check, the press at the hinge, the recorder whispering 10:30, like a metronome losing patience, the walk to the back gate in 19 seconds that feel rehearsed by the floor. He watches the way the lane oil smell changes in the corridor, how it thins, how it gives way to alley breath. He imagines the wine coat here, the rectangle pressed to a rib, the pockets never relinquishing their claim to weight, the habit of counting out loud not to tell time, but to summon it. The kid at coat check asks why anyone would leave a coat if the plan was to vanish afterward. The detective says sometimes you abandon the thing that names you, so the cameras, real or fake, remember the wrong object. Sometimes you leave a coat to hide a pocket's absence. Sometimes you drop an anchor to make a story drift toward it. The kid nods because the explanation feels like a magic trick if you don't stare too long at the trapdoor. The lab calls while the rehearsal is still shaking the dust off, and the anchor tattoo tech tells him the tape of the answering machine from the charity pile isn't just similar. It shares a noise fingerprint with the cassette labeled Staff Meeting 10/15/98. Background hiss is a signature when rooms ignore you the same way, and the hiss here walks with the same limp. Same space, different day, she says, or the same recorder, different pocket. The detective pictures the rectangle in the hands of someone who learned to put it where it hears what it needs. At the bookstore counter when staff argued about gate hinges, under the bowling alley locker when plans rehearsed themselves, by a payphone when a city learned how to breathe and lie simultaneously. He drives to the hardware store because he needs to hold a hinge the same way a choir director holds a tuning fork. The current clerk, with a name patch older than her face, pulls a box from a shelf where the past stacks itself into a skyline. Same manufacturer, model that survived price changes and lawsuits, finish like a dull apology. He presses the hinge against his palm and feels the weight of the night. He buys two because regret costs extra. On the way out, an old man shopping for screws points at the hinge and says, "Press the plate, not the tongue. That's how you teach a cheap door, to be honest." The detective smiles like the city just told a joke and forgot it was funny. He puts the hinge on the bowling alley door and doesn't attach it. He just rests it, metal against paint. He presses the plate. The door size open in the exact shape of cooperation. It's nothing and everything, a trick anyone could learn, a solution that doesn't make you feel heroic, a technology that fits in a pocket. He drops the hinge back into the bag like evidence and consolation. He calls on Tommy's mother again because grief is a map with landmarks that shift unless you visit them. He brings bread, because bread is the currency of visits that should have happened sooner. She says she dreamed of a phone that rang, and when she answered, no one was there, but she could hear a city breathing and a door practicing its manners. She says she woke up and the drip in the bathroom had stopped by itself. She says maybe the leak was embarrassed. He doesn't tell her that leaks and doors are the only things that learn shame in this city. He asks if Tom ever brought home a cassette for parts. She laughs and tells him Tom thought machines were monarchs and he was a minister. He didn't steal their bodies, he only taught them how to rule. The P.O. box that swallowed Lydia coughs up a form. The subpoena returns a list of forwarding addresses as vague as clouds. Mail forwarded. Service ended. Return to sender. One outlier. 3 months of delivery to a storefront that pretended to sell import magazines and actually sold phone cards in privacy. The detective goes there and listens to the bell over the door ring for an audience of faded posters. The owner shrugs in a language that holds both apology and indifference. Tall woman? The detective asks. Wine coat? The owner smiles as if asked to reminisce about a season. Everybody was tall, he says. Everybody wore a coat. He remembers a voice that counted exact change like it was poetry. He remembers a hand that did not let go of rectangles. He remembers mint burned to nothing twice in an hour. People like that, he says, buy quiet. Back at the small room, the board tilts. He writes the word quiet under arrangements and feels something click that isn't a hinge. The wine coat bought quiet. Cameras that were dummies, a door that didn't scream, staff whose shifts were thin enough to look through, a conduit who wanted to be useful because useful is a safer word than guilty. The arrested man ran because men like him are trained in one verb. The cashier vanished because sometimes a city eats and calls it weather. None of this is enough for a courtroom, but it is enough to find the heartbeat again. He breaks his own rule about not talking to reporters and calls the one who knows how to listen without imagining they wrote the music. He says, "Don't print this," which is a foolish sentence that people like him use when they are tired. He gives her the rhythm. She gives him nothing back but quiet, the shape of a promise. Later, On the evening news, a segment airs about lessons learned from solved cases, and the Chiron uses the word closure, and he turns the TV off because he would rather hear the city without a narrator for once. The thrift ledger's initials, TW, nag him like a pebble in a shoe. He starts imagining wrong Lydias and wrong Thomases because paranoia is diligence dressed up for work. He pulls the signatures he has like teeth. Tommy's from the maintenance logs, Lydia W. from the hiring form that came back smelling like coffee, the thrift donation waiver with TW drawn like a person learning to sign a check. He asks a handwriting analyst he doesn't entirely trust because the profession always looks like it's wearing a cape. She says the T of the thrift matches Tommy's laziness, and the W of the hiring form is not that W at all. 2 authors. 1 arrangement. He adds a pin next to the initials and writes between next to it in block letters. He finds a woman who worked coat check for 3 weeks in '98 and left because her mother got sick or the city got loud or both. She remembers the wine coat because it didn't sweep past her. It filled the space like weather. She remembers a moment at 10:40-something when the coat check line slowed to a stop, not because there were too many people, but because one person's stillness changed the math. She remembers a claim ticket with a corner torn off, number beginning with 3 and ending with 3 offered and then withdrawn like a test. You know when someone is acting for an audience that isn't there? She says, and he nods because he spends his life watching performances. That, she says, and the word lands like a bowling ball, riding the gutter to its end. He takes the locker door from the scrap pallet, one of the 3 that refused to disintegrate, and props it against a wall in the small room. He sets the recorder in the rectangle of its ghost and writes the number 1Tim45 in grease pencil, where whoever scratched it meant for a future to see it. He presses his thumb where the hinge would yield and listens for the click he knows isn't coming. Rituals matter even when they produce nothing but the next breath. He tells the room what he told the alley. Keep talking. The lab finds, in the arch glue of the shoe, particles of a de-icer used in '98 by the municipal depot a mile south of the bookstore. It snows there because the city believed the wind would forget to push in that direction. It never did. The de-icer's formula changed in '01, so the particle is a clock. He adds it to the board like a bead on an abacus, and the count he's doing does not end where solved takes a bow. He tries something petty because petty wins sometimes. He digs through the city's civil claims for 1999 and finds 3 complaints against the bowling alley for lost property at coat check. 1 is a scarf. 1 is a coat that found its way back a month later, misfiled. 1 is a redacted item the city paid out on and then sealed because the claimant's lawyer wrote a letter with teeth. He files a request. He gets a page that is most black bar and 1 unblacked word, pockets. He imagines a meeting where someone said, let it go, and someone else said, we already did. He circles the word until the page looks like a bruise. He visits the meter reader who once fielded a question about cameras. The reader is older now, a person constructed of fluorescent vests and patience, and he laughs like he's happy to be remembered for anything. He says the man who asked about cameras wore boots that wanted to be heard. He says a woman waited around the corner, coat that drank light, hands in pockets that held nothing and everything. She watched him ask, he says, like she wanted to learn the answer in case she needed to recite it later. He describes her posture and it matches the diner waitresses, the neighbor in slippers, the coat check temps, present like a stake in the ground, attention like a custody battle. The detective meets the sister at the mural again because the cranes change color with the sky and it helps to watch something mutable. She brings the denim jacket, he brings the hinge. They stand there, 2 people embarrassing a public art piece with their grief, and he presses the hinge plate to his palm and tells her what it does. She nods like he taught her the trick to a box that will still never open. Do you think she ran? She asks, not ready for an answer and asking anyway. He says he thinks she chose to walk fast. It's the best he can give without building a lie. Do you think the coat knew her name? She asks. He says yes, because the only thing worse than that being true is it being untrue. He walks the route again at dusk because the color tells the truth then. The bookstore's windows learn to be mirrors. The alley tries on its night face early. The bowling alley lights hum warm, inviting as a trap. He stations himself by the coat check and watches people trade names for numbers. He watches a tall woman in a wine coat, a different woman, a different coat. This is a city, after all. Hand over a ticket and receive a sleeve in exchange, and he almost laughs at the ordinary cruelty of coincidence. He follows her out into the night anyway, not because she is his ghost, but because he needs to practice being wrong gracefully. She gets on a bus, and the bus does not explode into revelation, it just goes. He gives the arrested man another hour, this time with the cassette recorder sitting on the table between them like a referee. He presses play on the answering machine tape, the half message. If you leave after close, click. The man closes his eyes like a dog hearing thunder through a floor. I know that, he says. We all knew that. The coat check girls told you that even if you didn't ask. The detective wants to say, not like this, but the distinction would be for him, not for the record. Did you know Lydia? He asks. The man opens his eyes and they are glassy with the kind of denial that isn't strategic. It's survival. I knew a lot of names that winter, he says. I forgot most of them on purpose. He returns to the small room at an hour that discourages hope. He plays the tapes in sequence, staff meeting breath, half-message rehearsal, the answering machine stutter, the counting voice, the panic hitch at 10:45 until the room becomes a clock. He stands and measures his steps from board to door to locker to hinge to desk and back, and the steps add up to 19 seconds. He thinks about the strip of negative where the door is mid-close, and he wonders if cameras always catch honesty as a side effect. He places the hinge on the table like a paperweight and the quarter with the thin eagle on top of it like a seal. Then the city, stingy with gifts, gives him one. The thrift store clerk calls, the one with the drawer that births tag snarls. You wanted Lydia? She says. She came in. The detective does not run because running is for men whose boots want to be heard. He walks fast because that is the verb he chose earlier. He arrives to find a woman leafing a rack of coats like a fortune teller flipping cards. Tall, yes. Wine coat? No, this is denim. Old, mended at the cuff with silver thread, a comet stitched into scorch. The sister's comet. The detective says the name out loud because saying names gives them rights. The woman turns, and the world does its pivot, the one where the background leans to hear the foreground. Her face is not the face from any description, which is exactly why it feels right. People remembered the coat. People always remember the coat. Faces are private. She says, I found this at a church sale, showing the denim and the comet as if the city owed her cash back for its cruelty. She says, I thought it was a sign. I thought I was supposed to return it. She says, I'm sorry. She says a lot of things people say when they walk into the middle of a story and realize the floor is not load-bearing. The detective takes the jacket like you take communion with your hands shaking. Inside the inner pocket, stitched flat the way you hide money from a future that needs it, is a slip of paper soft as cloth. Numbers, again, of course, numbers. 10:20, 10:30, 10:45. Underneath, a sentence in ink that tried not to smudge and failed. If you leave after close, take Damen, not the alley. He closes his eyes because the city has a sense of humor, and he doesn't. He gives the jacket to the sister in a parking lot that leaks light. She presses the comet to her mouth like she could inhale the past and make it metabolize. He shows her the paper. She nods once, slow, and says, She wrote that. She wrote everything down, even what she already knew, so she could blame the paper if she changed her mind. He asks if the handwriting is hers, and the sister laughs and cries simultaneously because the answer is both and neither. Handwriting is a mood disorder. She wrote the numbers, the sister says, but I've never seen that sentence in that shape. He hears the breath at 10:45 again, the tiny hitch where panic tried to be polite. He goes to the alley one more time that night because the ritual owns him. He stands at the gate and presses the hinge and does not enter, just listens to the door not scream. He rolls the quarter over his knuckles, the eagle now a rumor, and thinks about how the headline says solved and his board says arrangement, and the voice on the tape says almost and the city says later. He thinks about the denim jacket finding its way back by accident, about pockets returning messages like letters that went to war and came home altered, about the way people stow instructions for themselves and disobey them anyway because knights argue hard. He whispers the hours into the gate, 10:20, 10:30, 10:45, and the wind answers in the language of receipts. Somewhere, a cat considers a compromise. Somewhere, a train pretends to be thunder. Somewhere, a woman who once wore wine walks a street that changed its name. The detective turns away because this part of the story demands patience, like a toll. He leaves the hinge on the counter of the small room instead of in the evidence bag, just for a night, because some days you have to stare at the thing that moved the door and ask it to keep telling you how. And the tape, breathing its static like a witness who knows its value, spins to the leader and waits for the thumb that will press rewind again, because repetition is how you build a bridge over a river that doesn't want you on its far side. The jacket comes home, and the city notices in the way cities notice. Suddenly, then as if it always knew. The sister hangs the denim on the back of a chair like it might need to sit, and the comet stitched over the burn looks less like whimsy and more like a wound closed by constellation. The detective stands in the doorway and lets the room calibrate around the old fabric. You don't touch the past with your hands. You let it adjust the air first. On the table, the slip of paper with the hours and the sentence, Damon, not the alley, lies obedient as a thesis. He wants to ask the jacket questions, which is how you know the case has owned you. Instead, he asks the sister who stitched the comet. She smiles because that's the one soft question in months. Me, she says. Back when I thought fixing the burn might keep the rest of it from catching. He backs his questions out of their parking spots and points them at the practical. Where did the church sale get the jacket? What church? What month? The woman from the thrift remembers the table near the door, the smell of coffee and overripe bananas, a folding sign that misspelled fundraise in a way that made it friendlier. A parish on Hoyne, she thinks. A Saturday where the sky couldn't decide. He goes, not because a church will absolve anything, but because its basement is a species of memory the city respects. The bulletin board argues for both bingo and penance. A volunteer with keys, janitor rings her way down a stairwell painted in optimism. The basement is cinder block and diligence. Banquet tables, metal chairs, the kind of tape that tears wall skin when it's time to change the season. She opens a closet and paper decides to be avalanche. Flyers, sign-up sheets, pledge cards, the parish's arteries on letterhead. They dig for the year that mattered and what was priced at 50 cents. On the third box down, a ledger with crayon on the cover. Welcome spring sale. Even though spring didn't show, lists box of jackets, donated anonymous. Underneath, in smaller, more embarrassed script, one denim with stitching detail, set aside to ask family. The note sits there, a mercy that didn't get delivered because mercy has hours and the person who writes the hours has a life. We meant to call, the volunteer says, not defensive, simply reciting a human equation. Phones die. People think someone else called. He asks to see the room where donations land before the folding tables teach them manners. She leads him past the kitchen window where coffee considers boiling to a back corner where cardboard learns humility. The smell of old cloth holds court. He sees in the dust pattern the outline of something long set aside. On a shelf, a banker's box stenciled with a half-erased word, coats, speaks in silence. Inside, a raincoat that's forgotten rain, a sweater that will never fit a new owner right, a wool sleeve with a seam unthreading. In the bottom, flat and patient, a slip of carbonless paper with 3 ghost layers faded to whisper. Waiver for donation, TW, initials, itemized by LW, initials. The volunteer reads the letters aloud like conjugations. We had a Lydia, she says, unsure of the year, sure of the mint scent that used to offend the choir. She remembers a woman who counted change like she believed coins could argue back. Helped twice, the volunteer says, knew where everything went as if she was correcting us. He holds the waiver like a wing and the letters like a mouth finally opening, and he thinks arrangements love basements. On the church office computer, tower humming like an organ with asthma, he pulls a directory backup from a backup of a backup. The spreadsheet is a city in grid form. Lydia, volunteer, close sort, one cell says, more courtesy than record. A phone number now retired, a P.O. box that rhymes with the one that swallowed her. He prints the page on paper thin enough to reuse as confession. He wants to tell the volunteer everything, and tells her nothing because what she needs is to put tables away without inheriting the story. She blesses him anyway, because some people do that by habit, and he leaves with a ledger, a waiver, and the taste of coffee that never got made strong enough. Back at the small room, he pins the waiver under arrangements, and the board leans brighter, as if pleased with its new appointment. Tommy's initials as donor, Lydia's as itemizer. The denim jacket's pilgrimage becomes a route he can sketch, alley to locker, to thrift, to church, to home. It isn't a resurrection, it's a bureaucracy with better lighting. He takes photos, logs, the act of logging. He has learned that in cold cases, paperwork becomes sacrament. The lab adds a hallelujah disguised as a footnote. The strip of negatives from the canvas pouch, lightning across black, when processed gently and begged with chemicals past their own patience, reveals the elbow of a wine coat and a rectangle smudged near rib height. Not enough to be proof, just enough to be rude. The anchor tattoo tech tilts the frame and says, someone stood by a hook labeled 383 and practiced being inevitable. He hears the shape of inevitability in the number, the way loops like to meet themselves. He asks if they can enhance further. She laughs, because 1998 holds its secrets in smoke. He goes back to the diner at an hour that tastes like grease and regret, because witnesses digest differently by decade. The waitress remembers Lydia being impervious to pie and susceptible to quiet. She said 10:45 like she was listening to it, not telling it, she says, topping his coffee against instructions. She remembers the way Lydia's pockets didn't flop. They held themselves with the dignity of weight. The detective opens his notebook and, after months of circles and arrows, writes a plain sentence. Lydia W. rehearsed the night. He puts a period on it like a dare. What you can do with rehearsal is test it. He writes the numbers on a fresh card and drives to the bookstore, to the alley, to the bowling alley, to the church basement, not for performance, but for habit. He stands in each doorway at 10:20, 10:30, then stares at it at 10:45 and feels the city do its microscopic shudder. He presses the service hinge because he can, and the door confesses it will always yield to those who learned its language. He imagines the cashier reading the card and disobeying herself because human beings love failure better than rules. He imagines Lydia watching disobedience like the weather, interesting, practically useful, not personal. He wants a tape that doesn't rehearse. He wants the recorded past to stumble in its own voice. He goes back to the charity warehouse where answering machines from 100 apartments talk in loops. He does penance in dust. He plugs another, until what he hears is too ordinary to ignore. A message from a coat check to a locker. A person leaving a recording for a future person. The voice is Lydia's, or the voice he has decided belongs to her. Ticket 383, left side. If I can't get back, it's there. Count to 10:45. The rest is air and the click of a receiver practiced at brief goodbyes. He labels the audio with his own shaking pen. The anchor tattoo tech listens, scans, correlates. Same mouth, she says, or a mouth carrying the same ritual. He pins the waveform to the board next to the panic breath, like he's arranging a choir for a performance no one gets to applaud. The arrest continues being geometry. He visits the man with boots and sets the new audio on the table along with the denim jacket, with permission from the sister. Because decency might not count in court, but it counts in kitchens. He asks the boots if he's ever heard this voice before. The man looks at the ceiling and says he hears that voice when he's trying to sleep. It ends at if, he says, just like things do. The detective considers, and then doesn't tell him about the rest of the message. Mercy is a coin with two faces, both buy time, and neither buys redemption. He adds a new word under arrangements, deposit. The night is a bank with no hours, and Lydia made sure the lockers were open. Coats, cassettes, instructions, a habit of counting. Withdrawal at 10:45, a city that pretends solved is an amount you can write down. He spends time with Tommy's absence because it's become too articulate to ignore. The neighbor in slippers finds an envelope under a floorboard, either theater or timing, that holds a shift schedule with Tommy, oily, go early, scrawled across, and a map drawn by someone bad at maps. Bookstore to alley to lanes, arrows heavy like instruction. On the back, a locker number in big digits, then X'd out, then written again one higher, as if inventory changed in the night. He brings it to the board and it sits under the orphan shoe like family. If Tommy is gone because he chose to evaporate or because the city appointed him to, the map speaks regardless. He set the stage and someone else took curtain call. Lydia's shadow lengthens because he keeps pointing light at it. The P.O. box yields nothing with teeth, just rent receipts and flyers for deals that belong to eras now retro. The name appears in an apartment application that never became tenancy. Reason: move-in delay, a bureaucratic shrug. The church ledger shows her volunteering on 2 more Saturdays, then an abrupt stop. The hardware store loyalty card system remembers one purchase, gloves, then return. The bowling alley's league sheet shows a team that used a pun with pins and sins, comedies for later. The captain's signature beginning with L and ending with W, no middle offered. He invents a bucket for documents that feel like they're lying and dumps these into it because your mind needs costumes for your doubt. The sister tries on the jacket that was never stitched for her. It hangs wrong because grief changes shoulder slope. She digs in the pocket the slip of paper came from and finds a library card with the magnetic stripe worn thin, a single subway token from when the city changed fare systems and forgot to warn sentimentalists, and a receipt from a diner that printed "Thank you, Lydia," because someone wrote the name in the note field when splitting checks. The date is 3 days before the vanishing. The item circled is mint tea. She laughs through the same face that does crying and says, "We thought she pretended to like that." He takes the receipt for the board because boards love souvenirs. Under it he writes, "Lydia named at register. The city always says your name before you know to listen." He checks the bus routes because she wrote, "Take Damon." He rides one at 10:20 because choreography doesn't respect who is watching. The driver is too new to remember 98, but old enough to respect routines. The stops ring themselves like muted bells. A woman boards in a coat that drinks light because there is always one. This is a city. A teenager blasts a song with a beat that rhymes with the counting voice. He gets off 2 stops after the bowling alley because the rhythm says so and stands on a corner that used to be different. There's a laundromat now where a storefront once lied about magazines, and the neon folds the night into manageable parcels. He imagines Lydia at that corner, the rectangle in her pocket nagging the stitch, the recorder full or empty depending on how cruel your guess is. He imagines the cashier a block away, thinking she could walk faster than a plan. He imagines a hinge that learned the word please and did not refuse. He feels the air do its tiny shudder at 10:45 even though his watch says 8, because once you know where to listen, the city performs on repeat. He tries a different approach because cleverness stalls and patience needs partners. He canvasses for the kind of witness that never gets a microphone: maintenance staff, coat check temps, night shift bus drivers, janitors who learned boxes by weight. He hears the same chorus rendered in different arrangements. Winecoat watched like security. Winecoat didn't remove her hands from pockets. Winecoat knew the hinge. Winecoat told someone, "It's handled." Winecoat smelled like mint that didn't like you. One janitor remembers a woman waiting by the employee exit at 10:40-something, pretending to read a corkboard as if instructions were something you could window shop. She smiled at the paper, she says. Not at anyone, like the paper was an old friend. He watches the bowling alley sign flicker aim to steadiness. He watches the coat check kid grow into the counter. He watches the service hallway learn to accept that his footfall is a species of weather. He presses the hinge and it complies. He times the walk to the back gate again and the number refuses to change. He stands in the alley and thinks about how the word solved spins like a coin in headlines but sits flat on kitchen tables. He rolls his own coin. The eagle glints and then doesn't. He pockets it because rituals deserve their sanctuaries. On a whim he can justify in paperwork, he visits the municipal storage where abandoned items learn to call themselves evidence or trash, depending on whether someone wrote their names down. A clerk with the gravitas of a stamp leads him down aisles that smell like rubber and dust and give up. Shelves of boxes labeled late 90s misc blush at their anonymity. He finds one with a handwritten flourish: bowling, lockers. Inside, a jumble of keys, tags, lost padlocks, a plastic sign that implores in cheerful font, "Don't leave me behind," and a small square of laminated paper with a map eerily similar to the one scratched on the thrift key fob, except this one includes a second star, not just the hinge, but a mark at the coat check counter itself with the words "Ask 381. He knows 381 got picked up late by someone who knew the description. Does the map mean ask who asked? He writes 381 and 383 entangled. He pins the laminated map above the drawer labeled Arrangements, lets the board absorb its implication like a vitamin. He meets the mother again, and this time she is sewing a button that never needed a button and making it look necessary. He tells her about the jacket's pilgrimage. She nods like she expected faithfulness from cloth. She asks if he thinks the woman in the wine coat prays. He says yes without knowing, because believing your suspect makes deals with something bigger is how you give shape to a shapeless wrong. Then we have that in common, she says, and the thread bites the fabric and the button agrees to stay. The phone rings in the small room when he isn't there, and the machine takes it, and the recorded voice that learned to be ritual nests with another. A caller with a voice ground down to monotone, either disguise or exhaustion, saying, "Check the lockers again, not the fronts, the backs, the screws." The message earns the kind of laughter that borders on weeping. He returns, unscrews the back of the locker door they saved from scrap, the one that refused to die, and a paper flutters out. Light as prophecy. It's not a confession, it's a delivery template. Deposit 10:20, confirm 10:30, retrieve 10:45. If questioned, coat misplaced, we'll check again. At the bottom, initials that pretend at art, LW, TW. The detective folds the paper as if origami could turn it into a crane and send it where it was supposed to go. He holds the template over the denim comet like you hold a message over a wound to see if pressure helps. He thinks about the years screaming through quiet hinges, about tapes that practiced until even truth sounded rehearsed, about a headline that insisted and a city that refused. He knows what this isn't. It isn't handcuffs, and it isn't a sentence, and it isn't the miracle of a person being led back into a room by the elbow. He knows what it is: a spine. Cases need vertebrae. This one has been cartilage long enough. He brings the sister to the church basement because some rooms hold stories better than others. She runs her fingers over the ledger where someone wrote "set aside to ask family" and forgave themselves for failing to follow through. She looks at the waiver with Lydia's initials and says, "She put her name next to our jacket?" It isn't a question that needs answer. It is a asking that wants to be heard. She wanted to own the ending, the detective says, which may be unfair and is certainly true. The sister nods and sets the denim down like a sleeping child. He stands in the alley one more time before dawn because the city's breath is honest when it hasn't learned what day it's going to be. He presses the hinge with his thumb and says the hours quietly, like apologizing. 10:20, 10:30, 10:45. He hears a door close softly in his memory and a voice count out a future that became fact. He wants to hate the numbers. Instead, he respects them because they obeyed. He rolls the quarter over his knuckles and thinks about heads and tails and how nothing in this story landed flat. The coin flips and he catches it, holds it closed, doesn't look. Some outcomes you don't get to choose, some you do and then regret. He opens his hand and does not tell us what he sees. The board in the small room hums like a thing alive. Under arrangements between the elastic fiber and the orphan shoe and the taped breath and the laminated map, he places the locker template and writes one last word in a corner of bare white: hinge. He circles it once. He circles it again. He likes how the O of the circle looks like a mouth ready to speak. He tells the empty room the line he always tells it at this hour: keep talking. And for a second that might be an inch, or might be a year, he thinks he hears the city answer. Not with closure, not with mercy, but with the rustle of paper deciding to become a voice.